The storm had begun as a smear of slate on the horizon, a bruise spreading along the belly of the sea, but by dusk it pressed its weight upon King's Landing so that the red keep seemed to groan against the sky. In Robert's chambers the shutters rattled in their iron hooks, and the rushes on the floor stirred in little eddies as if the wind had made a road among them. The king lay awake, not because of the wind, not because of the wine he had drunk to drown the day, but for a reason that ought to have shamed him and did. He had started to fear the nights. He could not say when it had begun. Perhaps when Jon Arryn died. Perhaps when Eddard Stark had looked at him with that northern sorrow in his eyes, as if Robert were a thing already lost and unburiable. Perhaps later still, the night he woke from the old dream of the trident and found his chest tight and his mouth dry, and for a breath of time he had thought he was drowning on blood, not river water. Whatever the cause, the nights came now like memories with teeth. He had sent the servants away. He sent away the queen with slow words and slower smile, watched the lion's mask of her face tilt, and the coin-bright hair fall like a curtain as she went. He sent away the fool, the hounds, the singer with his clever hands and empty songs. He kept only the sound of the wind and the old stag-headed cup his father had once held. He kept that, and the thought of the two boys who shared his blood and did not share his peace, because there had never been peace between those two, and not enough between any of them. Someone knocked. The sound was a bone in the wind's throat. He said come, and it was Eddard Stark who entered, spare as a winter branch, salt on his cloak like hoarfrost. The northern lord moved carefully, as if the room were a sick room. Not wrong, Robert thought with a curl of the mouth. Ned set his gloves on the table, the leather wet in dark patches. You look half drowned, Robert said. The storm tried to carry you back home? The storm's an old friend, Ned said. It leaves you cleaner than a court does. Ah! Robert swung his feet to the floor. The bed creaked as if complaining of the weight of him. Then we had best leave the court to its perfumes and let the storm take us. I sent for you because sleep and I have quarreled, and you are the next best comfort to a fight. Ned took that without blinking, which made Robert smile, because here was the only man left who would not bow to a jest or a threat. You did not call me to share a cup, Ned said. There was no accusation in it. He simply named the thing like a man naming snow. Robert lifted the stag-headed cup and let the wine wash against the edges. I have thought on Jon, he said, and watched how Ned's face changed, a ripple under ice. Jon was the hinge of half my life. When he died, the door swung and I did not like what it opened to. A storm can tear doors off hinges, Ned said quietly, but you asked me to serve as hand. That calls for both of us to hold fast. Ha! You hold fast, cold and faithful. Robert set down the cup. He had not drunk. The wine had a smell like dusk in orchards, sweet and something else. I've been thinking, Ned, of my brothers.
Ned waited.
The wind leaned briefly against the shutters and then let them go. I gave Stannis Dragonstone, Robert said, and there was an old ache in the words. Gave Renly Storm's End. I thought at the time it was well. The boy who smiled, the boy who came oily with the sea and salt to my victory, he would keep the Stormlands singing. And Dour Stannis, 7 take me, he would be a stone well suited to a stone. Ned's gaze lowered to the stag on the cup. Dragonstone's a hard place to give a living man, Robert. That does not mean it did not need a keeper. And we needed Stannis's hard hand near, Robert said. Near me, but I wanted is too soft. I thought I deserved ease. I thought I had earned laughter. He rapped thick knuckles on the bedpost. So I sent Stannis to an island full of smoke and old dragon ghosts, and I kept Renly in sunshine. And the two of them have sharpened themselves against the gift ever since. Now Jon is dead, and the court is lions in men's skins, and I am starting to see what happens when brothers are a storm within a house. Ned considered, eyes narrowing as if against a glare. You are their liege and their blood. What do you plan to do? Robert stood. The floor groaned. He was not ancient, he was simply heavy. He had been heavy a long time. I plan to set a table that is not the small council's, and a fire that is not the throne's shadow, and call my brothers to it, as sons of Stefan Baratheon and Cassana Estermont. Before we are lords of anything, we were boys in a castle with too much wind, and if there is any sense left in me, I will make use of that before the wind blows the crown from my head or the heads from my sons." Ned's mouth flattened, and then softened. "Storm's End." Aye, the word felt like a thing thrown for a hound to fetch. Storm's End. I will go in truth, not for a hunt, not for a progress with banners. I will go as Robert with a small retinue and you with me, and I will write to Stannis and write to Renly, and bid them meet us there and leave their tempers on the road, or else I will tear them off like old epaulets and send them home nearly naked in pride. Will you come, Ned? I swore to, Ned said, and that was that. They made their preparations at dawn. The rain stepped down to a fine silver, a net hanging through which the morning hauled itself. The city took the news the way a great body takes a pinprick. A twitch here, a mutter there, but the whole went on, carts rolling, bells calling, gutters filling with slow suds. Cersei came to watch them depart, a veil pinned precisely, a smile a blade thin enough to hide in hair. Joffrey did not come. Robert did not ask. Sansa and Arya watched with the different hungers of their ages. Robert said nothing to them that was not a father's empty blessing. It angered him that the words felt like clothes on a borrowed body. The royal galley cut from the quay with a hiss like a snake. Barristan Selmy stood upon the foredeck like a carved figurehead come to life to be more rigid than wood. Ser Ares Oakhart had the rain on his lashes and did not blink. Eddard's cloak lay over the rail to darken slowly. Littlefinger bowed low as they passed, elegant as a spill of ink, and Varys merely folded his soft hands and lowered his gaze like a man entering a September. Robert looked inland. "Do you think the lions will gnash?" he asked. "They always do," Ned said. The sea made a different kind of storm. It had no malice of its own. It lifted and fell, and if a man did not learn to put his weight where the deck wanted it, the sea would teach him a bruise and consider the lesson kindly given. Robert had never been a sailor, but he had ridden water enough in his wars. He shrugged the rein from his shoulders and went below to the table of maps. Ned stood beside him and spoke of harbors. "We'll put in at Weeping Town," he said. "Take the road along the coast. If you want to come upon Storm's End as a brother and not a king, best to arrive like a man who has known mud." Robert barked a laugh. "I've known mud as well as any pig." His finger traced the lines of the map. "Do you remember when our fathers rode these roads together? Not as lords then, only as neighbors with good hounds and old appetites." "I remember a letter more than a ride," Ned said. "My father wrote that Lord Stefan had a barrel of oysters lashed to the back of his saddle, and that your mother scolded him and then ate half with him anyway. In Winterfell we ate pickled mushroom and salted trout and called it a feast." Robert smiled until the smile slipped. The maps smelt of glue and old paper. They also smelt faintly of smoke. Dragonstone was somewhere out of sight and yet near in the room, like an old joke told by someone you feared. He sat back and blew out, and the candle, insulted, guttered. "Stannis said to me once that I confounded justice with comfort," Robert said. "He was drunk a little when he said it. I hit him." Ned looked at him until Robert realized he wanted to know if the story was true. He raised his hands. A tap, with 2 fingers of a fist. He glowered for 3 days and then challenged me to a joust with staves as if we were back in the yard. And I beat him, and then he beat me. I thought then that we would find a way to keep beating each other and go on. He set his knuckles on the table and pressed until the skin went pale. "I see now that there is another sort of beating a man can live under, and worse. I will not put my realm beneath it." Ned turned a page of the map that did not need turning, a neat northern way to give weight to a vow without making it religious. "Then call them as brothers born from one hearth. And when you are together, Robert, do not forget to listen as well as to laugh." Robert lifted the cup and drank. He drank for steadiness, not joy, and it was a poor vintage for that. He set the cup aside and thought of ink. Letters went out then, parchment crisp and salted with the breath of a king too large for his chair. One to Dragonstone, one to Storm's End. He wrote neither like a monarch nor a suppliant. He wrote as a brother whose childhood had been all wind and stone and the clatter of training swords, whose manhood had been blood and banners and the hunger of victory that did not feed him after all. He told them he was going to Weeping Town and then to the castle, and that if they did not come he would come to them, and that if they barred the gate he would sit outside and sing in a voice large enough to make the sea laugh and shame them and wait until hunger did what shame would not. He signed with his name and an old jest that only they would know, a fragment of a song about a stag and a storm and the mother who had tried to keep them all dry. On Dragonstone, the night was a mouth that breathed smoke. The basalt walls sweated in the wind. Stannis Baratheon stood over a table with books stacked like ramparts, and if the candles burned low, he neither noticed nor cared. He had the look of a man who had argued with numbers until they insulted him and then bent to make them apologize. He had parchment beneath his hand with a line of ink half complete. He had not moved his quill for some time. His jaw was a hinge set too tight. Davos Seaworth, who made no habit of knocking twice, knocked and entered. He had a face the sea had carved, lines that could be mistaken for sternness until he smiled, whereupon the lines showed themselves to be a kindness deferred and thus more valuable. "A raven," Davos said, and did not add from the king because Stannis knew the hand. Stannis held out his palm without turning. The seal broke differently under his fingers. He read once and then again because he liked to test the words for flaws. When he finished, he laid the letter down and looked at Davos the way a man looks at weather. "Well," Davos said, because silence around Stannis was like leaving iron in brine. "Brother to brother, is it? At Storm's End? I hope he means it." "He must mean it," Stannis said, and the words sounded like a man choosing his weapon. "He is not clever enough to lie without meaning. He can do it, but he prefers to let the truth work for him." Davos grinned. "Most men do. The truth's a good worker if you pay it fair." Stannis's mouth twitched. "Renly will go," he said. "He thinks a feast cures hunger." "A feast is at least food," Davos said mildly. "You'll go." "I am going." Stannis did not take his hand from the letter. "I will not put into Storm's End like a falcon to a glove. I will come by sea and then by foot, and I will not be greeted by banners, and I will not bow under laughter." "You are the one who says a man should not speak of what he will not do," Davos said. "Say then what you will do." Stannis's face, always a mask of sorts, darkened along the cheekbones, which in him was like a blush. "I will go. I will listen, because if I do not, the realm tilts. If Robert is ready to speak of justice as more than a word he flings at a man he does not like, I will be there to hear it and reply. And if he is not..." He did not finish. He did not need to. Davos had come from Flea Bottom. He knew how to hear a silence as if it had teeth. "Maester Cresson will counsel you to go," Davos said, "and to eat more. You eat like a man feeding an enemy in his own belly and wanting to starve him." Stannis made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had allowed itself to be happy. "Tell my men to make the fury ready." "They are always ready," Davos said, "because you are." "When did you learn to flatter?" Stannis asked. Davos rubbed at the pouch around his neck out of habit, where he kept finger bones that were his penance and his luck, though he did not believe in luck. "When I learned which truths make hard men less hard," he said. "A smuggler's trick. Used it on you. Still do." Stannis said nothing for a time, and they let the storm's voice fill the room. Finally, he said low, "I remember our father in the yard at Storm's End, throwing the antlered helm to Robert and telling him to run. Renly was a baby with milk on his mouth. I was the one who knew how far it was to the gate and how many steps it took to climb the sea tower. Robert only ever knew that he would win the race. He never counted the steps. He never had to." Stannis picked up the letter again. "He is counting now, or he thinks he must. That is new. I will go." The fury cut the water like a sword through green silk. Her captain gave orders as if the sea were a creature to be reasoned with and he were tired of its old tricks. Stannis stood at the prow and let the wind find what was left of his hair. Davos stood near and kept his counsel and his company, which were cousins under the skin. On the battlements of Storm's End, men watched a slice of bright even through rain, and word went to Renly before he could finish teasing a laugh from a guest who wanted to be charmed and wanted to pretend she did not. Renly left the table with grace enough to make absence look like a gift. He had green on his sleeve and a sprig of rosemary at his wrist. Loras Tyrell, who only wore what looked like flowers when it also worked as a blade, fell into step beside him. "The Fury sails," Loras said. "Dragonstone's lord waxes dutiful." "Wax is for banners," Renly said lightly. "Stannis's duty is iron, if you can call iron a virtue. You can call anything a virtue if you wear it with enough pride," Loras murmured. They reached the parapet. The sea showed its teeth and then sheathed them. The Fury held her course. Renly set his elbows on the wet stone and did not care if it stained his silk. He loved this wall because it loved no man. It had stood against wind and war and would stand when his bones were dust. Its indifference gave him a rest from the work of being loved. "My brother calls me to be a brother," Renly said. "He writes like a man who has remembered he once had a mother. And you?" Loras looked at him with an interest he seldom hid and never made gross. "I," Renly said. "Remember the boy with bruises on his knees who stole honey cakes and then stood in front of me when Cassandra came to scold us? Robert has always been what the sun pretends to be. He warms you when he smiles, and if you walk too near, he burns and you call it an honor." He lifted his hand as if to catch the rain. Stannis is the hearth when the wood is poor. You must sit close and mind the sparks. You can live by that fire. People do. They do not thank the fire, and the fire does not want thanks. Then your choice is whether to be a man who wants warmth or a realm that needs to live," Loras said. Renly smiled sideways. "You dress up hard choices nicely, Flower." "I dress them up so you will pay attention," Loras said simply. Renly looked back to see. "He will come by road," he said. "Robert always liked the way his boots sound on a bridge. He may surprise you." Loras's hand warmed Renly's on the stone because that was his way. Quiet pressure, a courage given by touch. The king came by road. He left the galley where the coast bunched into small harbors, and the distant great drum of the storm made the horses nervous so that they danced under their riders like boys dared to run in a September. Robert rode with his head uncovered, the rain painting his hair flat and washing lines clean for a moment, until they returned deeper. He did not laugh much. Barristan watched the road. Eddard watched the hedgerows. When they reached Weeping Town, the innkeeper scrambled and the small folk gaped, and the old women crossed themselves as if the storm had stolen their own kin's faces and put them on knights. They did not linger. Robert took what rest a meat pie and a chair could give and was rising before the chair had the chance to warm to him. He was not a man made for lingering. When the keep rose out of the weather like a jaw in the sea, Robert's breath left him, and he did not like how it left him. He had seen Storm's End from the water too few times. From land, too many times without stopping. He had avoided his own childhood thresholds as if they were traps for a man who had outgrown their bait. Now the gatehouse sent down its drawbridge as if welcoming any traveler, and the trumpet spoke. Renly waited in the gate's mouth with a ring of men around him like an enamel border. He came down the steps quickly, before a herald could announce and embroider names. He embraced Robert and laughed, and the laugh was real, and so Robert laughed too, because laughter is a language brothers remember even when they have learned to use words as lances. "7 hells you are wet," Renly said, wiping at Robert's cheek with thumb and forefinger like a mother with a tall child. "Have you forgotten the use of a hood, your grace?" "Forgot nothing," Robert said. "I cast it aside so the rain would know me." Renly rolled his eyes up to the sky. "Hear that? He courts you now. Don't turn his head." Then more low, in a breath between them, "You look well, Robert. You look like a green bedspread," Robert said, because the brocade was too much, and he loved saying so and seeing Renly, who had dressed for it, accept the jest like a favorite dog whose name was meant to be ridiculous and therefore cherished. They went through the yard. Robert saw the old places with the jolt a man gets when he passes a mirror by accident and catches an angle that shows his father. The tilt of a roof, the way the rain ran and pooled, the nick like a mouth in the stair where Stannis had once split his lip. He looked for it and found it, a white crescent in gray stone, and touched it with the same fingers that had, once, reached down to pull Stannis to his feet and then let him go again because he had not wanted to seem tender. Stannis arrived before the night cut down fully. The fury gave him to the shore, and his men formed around him like water around a post. He wore no jewelry. His sigil rode on his breast as if its weight were a necessary discomfort, like a prayer after penance. When he met them in the hall, he bowed properly to Robert and not at all to Renly, because Renly had been a boy the day Stannis decided he would not bow to children who mocked him, and the years had not worn that decision down. Robert sent the hall away. He did it with a wave that had an old authority to it, and the lords and the stewards and the cupbearers and the speak-soft women looked to Renly and then to Stannis and then to the king, and then they left because a storm was brewing and they were wiser than to be trees. Only Eddard stayed, and Davos because Stannis' shadow had his outline. Loras went at Renly's look, neither slow nor fast. Barristan went because he would stand at the door as long as a king breathed, and if the door had ears, his back would keep them honest. The fire cracked, the stones sweated. Robert sat in his father's chair and hated how it fit him and loved the memory of nights when he had not had a chair at all but a boy's stool to squirm on under Cassana's eye. He made himself stand to greet Stannis on equal ground. It mattered, though he could not have said why, only that Davos's mouth eased, and Eddard's shoulders loosened, and Renly stopped pretending his hand was not on the back of a second chair as if he might need it for sword work. "Brothers," Robert said, and tasted the word like wine he had not had since a summer before memory learned to count winters. "I have called you home." Stannis's mouth pressed. "This is not my home," he said. "Dragonstone is my seat." "Dragonstone is a rock with doors," Robert said, and caught himself. He took breath again and let it out, slow, like a man easing down a bough. "But you were born under this roof and cried in this draft, Stannis. This is your home as much as it is mine and Renly's, even if you hate it more for that." Renly's smile tilted. "He loves things by hating them," he said, but softly. "It warms him to be dissatisfied." Stannis did not honor the jest with irritation, which surprised Renly into silence. "Why have you called us?" Stannis asked. "Because I am tired of sleeping with my hand on a sword," Robert said. "And because the realm is more tired than I am, and has not slept in truth for years, and because Jon Arryn's death took from me what made me bearable to myself. I would have you both hear me now without courtiers to make the words fancy. I wronged you, Stannis." Both brothers looked at him. Renly's brows rose, delighted in advance at any theater that did not put him on a rack. Stannis did not move. "I wronged you," Robert said again, and made himself say it like a man drawing thorns. "I should have given you Storm's End. You held it for me, and you held it against men who would have licked my blood off the stones and called it victory. And I rewarded you with a rock you did not ask for and a council seat that put you under a lion's eye without a sword in your hand to answer it. I did it because it was easy. I did it because it made laughter come back to the halls, and because Renly has a gift with people and I wanted a place that would suit that gift. But I took it from the man who had earned it most, and I did not ask your leave, and I did not even do you the courtesy of saying aloud that you would hate it but must do it for me." Stannis's head came a fraction of an inch to one side, as if Robert had set down a tool he had assumed was fused to his hand. "And now?" he said. "Now I say it," Robert said. "I am sorry. I will not pretend the gift was poisoned by malice. It was poisoned by carelessness, which kills as surely. I cannot undo all I have done, but I can do better with what I still have to give. I ask you here to set our house in order. Not for my pride, for the realm. I have enemies in my bedchamber and my counting house. They are clever and I am not. I will make use of a thing I do have, 2 brothers who, however little they may care for the way I shuffle my feet, know how to stand." The storm took a breath. In its pause, the fire hissed as if wetted. Renly lifted his chin and looked at Stannis, and Stannis looked at the fire as if it owed him money and had come up short. "You ask for what?" Stannis said finally. "For you to take the hand's chain," Robert said. For you to stand in the room where lions make smiles and show teeth, and bite when it is time. I want you to grind the court like grist and give me flour I can bake bread from. I want you to set the ledgers to rights and make debts into dues and dues into payments. I want you to tell me when I am a fool. More than that, I want you to say it where men can hear and learn to love you for it or fear you for it, and I do not care which. I will bear the crown, Stannis. You will bear my conscience for a while, because mine is too bruised to trust. Renly made a soft sound that escaped before he could make it pretty. Stannis did not move. Davos's fingers went to his pouch again and stilled there. Eddard looked from one to the other and saw where the bridge might crack. "And me," Renly said after a time. "What do you ask of the flower and the laugh?" Robert turned to him with a relief he had not named when it entered him, because he knew this road. He could speak to Renly where he could only throw words Stannis's way like stones and see which the dour brother picked up and which he let sink. "I ask you to be what you are," Robert said. "To dress the things Stannis builds so men may walk on them without cutting their feet. You are a lord and a friend to 1,000 men who think they are your friends. I will make you lord of the marches in deed as well as in name. I want you to go to Highgarden and speak as if you had been raised there and think as if you had been blooded at Storm's End. Make them love the king again. Make them remember that a stag's antlers look well in a meadow. If you choose to wed, and I think you will choose to, do it where the realm can rest its head. I have chosen laughter too often to hide fear. You will teach laughter to be brave." Renly's mouth softened. He was young, yes, younger than his clothes, younger than his confidence. But he was not a child, and he had been waiting all his life to hear his brother speak to him, not as a jester who had stolen a crown and must be humored, but as a lord given a field and told to name his harvest. "I will go to Highgarden," he said. "I will wear flowers and count coins with them and teach them to like the sound. But," he glanced at Stannis and then at Robert, "I will not give Storm's End to Stannis. This is my seat. I am not ashamed to say I like it, and I do not only like it because it is a toy." Stannis's eyes cut to him. "I did not ask for it," Stannis said. "No," Renly said. "You did not ask for anything. You never ask. You only get angrier when people do not give, as if asking were an insult to the thing asked. I know you think me frivolous. I know you think I stole your cradle. But I am a lord and I have been a good one. If you take this seat from me, you make enemies in the only place where I am purely loyal. You will not like what that disloyalty tastes like." "Enough," Robert said, and he put no heat in the word, but it made the stone feel warmer. "No one takes Storm's End. I am not here to shuffle chairs. Stannis." He faced his middle brother. "I will not insult you by pretending that a chain replaces a castle. I say only that the work will be the same. You held the walls once. Hold mine now, the walls of this realm. Renly will make friends where you can make the rules hold. Between you, we may starve the lions without ever drawing a blade." Stannis grunted. "You want me to be hand? Ido. And if I say no?" There was a dare in it. Stannis had always dared truth to fail him. "Then I will sit outside Dragonstone's gate and sing," Robert said, and they all, every man in the room, knew he meant it. Stannis's mouth moved once as if he might, against all precedent, smile. "Do not sing," he said. "I will be hand." The words felt less like a surrender than like a hammer going down. Renly exhaled as if a string had been loosed. Davos closed his eyes for a heartbeat and opened them on a world altered by no more than a sentence. Eddard nodded, once, not as a courtier but as a man whose companion has chosen a road that will break his boots and strengthen his legs. "Good," Robert said. It sounded child-simple and dangerous. "Good. I would have you both in King's Landing then, and together. We will walk into that den with our antlers high, and if anyone says the lions own the shadows, we will bring a lantern." Renly laughed softly. "You are fond of your antlers tonight." "I am remembering my head," Robert said. He gestured, and a steward, who had been waiting just beyond the door like Patience with a tray, entered with wine and bread and a wedge of cheese that smelt of feet and joy. "We will eat now and not speak of the court. The court is like a bruise. It is relieved by pressure and returns to purple when you take the thumb away. We will eat, and we will speak of our mother, and then I will go and kneel at the place where she used to stand and scold me for tracking in with blades muddy. And in the morning we will begin to bind up what we have ourselves torn. They ate. They did not speak often, and when they did it was about things of no weight that made the air more breathable. Robert said something crude and Renly embroidered it until it was more filigree than filth. Stannis spoke of a lampmaker in Dragonstone who could make a flame that would neither gutter in a draught nor flare in stillness, and Robert mocked him gently for caring about such a one, and Stannis did not take offense, which meant the world had truly shifted. After, they left the hall with its heat and walked the corridors like men remembering a tune. Renly's feet took him unerringly to a stair and then another, where the stone remembered Stannis's blood. At the small door in the sea tower, Stannis touched the nick Robert had sought earlier and frowned when his fingers came away clean. "I bled there," he said. "It was the day Father came home from Shipbreaker Bay with a fish that still moved. He laughed and said I was a soft thing, and then he kissed me on the brow and told me to learn to be hard. I decided to do it. I have not stopped." The words ought to have been stone. They were a little water. Renly leaned beside him. "He told me I was too small for my britches and then gave me an apricot," Renly said. "I decided to be larger than my britches forever. I have not stopped either." Robert stood behind them and felt the wind come up through the stair like a memory. "He told me to stop running in the hall," Robert said. "I decided to run until the hall gave way. Did, once. I broke a bench. Mother cried and laughed. I was the sort of son who made a woman do both at once. That may be a sin." "Only if you like the sound," Stannis said. "I do," Robert admitted. "I love it well." They stood in an old silence and heard a present storm. The sea spoke because it always had something to say, even if it only said the same thing differently. That night, Robert did kneel in the little square of floor where Cassanna Estermont had once stood to meet her sons as they came in to be slapped for mud and kissed for having returned uncut. No one wrote down what he said. The walls kept it. A man does better praying to a mother than to a god he fears. The gods have rules. Mothers have mercy and scorn both, and keep them in the same hand. Morning brought a clean wind with teeth, and the decisions made in night held in day. Stannis wrote letters in a hand so small a scribe would have called it cheapness of ink if he had not known it was thrift of lies. He named men to offices and removed others. He sent for ledgers from the Master of Coin and for guards for the gates that were not Lannister red. He did not snarl. He only gave orders with an economy that made men realize how many words they had used for years to avoid doing their work. Renly sent a raven to Highgarden, carried politeness and promise. It carried an invitation to speak of feasts and fortifications, to talk of roads and the fashion of their flowers this year, to admire their orchards and ask for their oath. It carried with it a memory of a smile and the ability to make a lord feel taller in his own seat. Mace Tyrell did not receive it in this scene, but one could feel the letter moving across the map like a hand smoothing a rumple. Eddard wrote to Winterfell. He did not say much. He said that the king had remembered his brothers and that the realm might be better for it, and that the girls should keep their heads down and their eyes open, and that Arya must not climb in places that would break her. He wrote to Catelyn and did not write anything he could not also say aloud in a court if he had to, which is a way of being honest and careful at once. Davos went down to the kitchens and asked for onions. He ate one raw, because it pleased him to taste again the thing that had saved a castle once, and because all the lords were upstairs and here was a room where men laughed without hiding it. He talked to a boy who had never been beyond the walls and who with wide eyes listened to a story about a blockade and a boat cutting through green water black with night, because stories are a kind of bread, and Davos had always been a smuggler of bread when it was needed. By noon the hall had the smell of a plan. By evening it had the sound of one. Cersei Lannister, in King's Landing, received nothing but the news that the king had gone to Storm's End and that, more troubling, he had taken Eddard Stark with him and not told her which braids his thoughts had taken. She stood at a window that pretended to be generous with air and looked at the city as if it were a well-bred dog newly inclined to bite. Jaime came because he came when his sister was angry, the way a man goes quiet when a horseshoe grows hot. He leaned in the doorway and played knucklebones with words. "Our king went to the sea," he said. "Do you suppose he'll come back washed clean?" "He could drown for all the seven care," Cersei said. She did not turn. "Men drown every day. The river burps and no one hears the song. But he will not drown. He will come back with salt in his beard and ideas in his head, and some oaf will call it wisdom." "You fear wisdom?" Jaime's voice had laughter in it, the way a sheath has a knife. "I fear Eddard Stark," Cersei said, and now she turned, and there was nothing in her face but light caught in a cup of glass. "I fear a realm where stubborn men hold hands long enough to remember why they hated me less than they hated each other, and then look up and see the lion and call it an enemy. I fear men who discover that justice tastes better than wine. I fear Stannis more than I fear priests. And I fear that Robert has decided to be a husband to an idea." Jaime kicked at a stool and watched it bounce. "Let them set their table. Tables break. Knives slip. I have lived a life at tables." She crossed to him and put her hand against his cheek, and for a moment she looked almost tired enough to call it honesty. "Be ready," she said. "If they come back holding each other up, they will lean against us." "Let them," he said, because he lived for leaning and the pushback. "Let them." Varys heard of it. Peter Baelish heard of it. They heard that Stannis had been named Hand and Renly an envoy to the south, and they heard that Barristan's old back had straightened and that the Master of Coin had started to look somewhere between busy and endangered. Varys smelled new cloth where old rags had been and did not change his step. Littlefinger weighed the jingle of coins and laughed to himself, because he had always hoped for a game, and this was a game. He smudged 2 columns of a ledger with a fingertip and then wiped the ink clean. He whistled a little tune about a stag losing its antlers and growing wings. He did not think the tune true. He simply liked the picture. When the brothers left Storm's End, they did not do it with trumpets. They did it with rain in their hair and the look of men who were both glad to be going and sorry to be leaving, which is how grown men feel about homes that are more honest than the lives they have made. The roads were kinder. The storm had broken itself and left its cool breath behind. The royal party went first. Behind came Stannis with his men, and behind them Renly with the colors of his house and the Tyrell green on a single pennant that he had not paid for yet but felt as if he had. On the second day, Robert rode beside Stannis and did not speak for a long while. He had learned a little silence when Jon died. He used it improperly often. Now he used it because there was a rhythm of hooves that did not need mending. At last he said, "There is a thing of bastards." Stannis's face, which could have been carved at any time and sold as old wood, took on an attention that made the air less forgiving. "A thing of bastards," he repeated. "Jon hunted through the city before he died," Robert said. "He found things. He wrote them in the air like a man trying to catch smoke with fingers. Ned has notes. He has a piece of a hue and a thread of a hair. It leads to a hall with lions in it. I do not think I am a blind man, Stannis. I think I have had my eyes closed because I did not wish to give names to shadows. You will look. You will tell me what color the shadows are." Stannis's jaw worked. "I have looked," he said, but so low the hooves almost ate the words. "I was looking when Jon died. He sent me word and I went after it. I found patterns, black of hair, blue of eye. A stag looked very much like a bull when it ran in the right light. I did not speak because I did not think anyone would listen to me long enough for the words to do the work. And now," Robert kept his eyes on the road. "Will you speak now?" "I will," Stannis said. "I will speak to you first, and then we will decide whether we speak to the realm. But know this, there is a way to truth that does not lead to peace. If we take it, there will be fire in the streets. If we do not, there will be rot at our table. Choose your poison, Robert." "I would drink neither," Robert said. "I am old enough to know I do not get to choose that way." Renly ranged ahead, bejeweled and bright for the small folk, who came to their doors to see and seeing, thought perhaps the realm was better than yesterday because a handsome lord had smiled at them and his hair had not yet run red with anything that concerned them. Loras rode at his shoulder and told him the names of flowers that grew wild in ditches. He had learned the names as a boy because he had been told to, and now he said them aloud because he liked the sound and liked the way they made Renly listen and nod and store them away as gifts to give to ladies he would meet at Highgarden. At night, they made camps that were more like wandering inns. They ate around fires and did not keep the lords too near. Robert spoke with a tanner who had known his father, and Stannis corrected a sergeant's choice of guards for the midnight watch, and Renly danced with a farmer's daughter because she did not know the steps and laughed anyway. Eddard wrote another letter to Winterfell and sealed it with a sigh. On the day they came within sight of King's Landing, the light went gold with an unkindness that made the city look like a thing that deserved all it got. The mud dried in patterns. The air smelt of stew and horse and something sweet rotting. Robert sat taller in the saddle and touched the antler crown that he had not worn leaving and would wear entering, because he wanted the city to remember what a stag was shaped like. At the gate, the gold cloaks eyed the party with the caution of men whose pay might change hands soon. Stannis looked at their belts and saw the marks that told him who had bribed whom last, and Robert looked at their faces and saw who had eaten enough and who had not, and Renly looked at their posture and saw who had spent time in a yard and who had spent time at dice. They were all right in different ways. They were a house arriving with its doors shut tight and its windows opeeny.
No,
They went first to the throne room because a king who goes anywhere else first makes a liar of his own crown. Robert did not sit. He stood and let the rumors scuttle. Stannis stood at his right like a shadow a man could lean on. Renly stood at his left with his hand on his hip and his mouth holding a smile like a bit, restful in his teeth. The hall filled. Cersei Lannister walked in with the sound of wine poured from a height, pleasing and performative. Jaime came easy behind her like a knife passing through silk that had consented to the cut. Varys came as if floating. Littlefinger came as if he had been in the room always and had only at this moment decided to be visible. Lords of small worth came and tried to make themselves worth more by the way they bowed. Barristan stood at the foot of the dais, and no one needed him to move to know they ought to stand straight. "Your Grace," Cersei said. The words made no claim of affection. "You have been to the sea." "I have," Robert said. "It's wet." Polite laughter moved like mice. Renly's mouth twitched. Stannis looked at Cersei and decided 10 things about what she had worn and why. "Will you sit?" Cersei asked. "No," Robert said. "I have sat enough. I have named a hand." The words moved through the hall like cool air does, interesting the embers. "Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, will bear the chain and the work. I have asked him to set my realm in order. He has agreed." There was a rustle then. There was more than rustle. Men who had thought themselves wise because they had always placed coin on a lion's square found their fingers twitch. Men who had thought themselves invisible felt exposed to a weather they had not predicted. Stannis let their eyes slide off him because he could not be bothered to catch them. "And you?" Cersei asked, turning her head a fraction to regard Renly. "And the boy who steals hats when no one is looking?" Renly's smile went wider and showed no teeth. "I am a boy no longer, Your Grace," he said, "and I only steal what looks better on me. I go south to visit gardens. I am very fond of gardens. They are full of useful growth. And weeds," Cersei said. "I like weeds best," Renly said. "They are honest. They do not pretend to be peonies." He turned to the hall and let his voice carry. "Hear it. I go to Highgarden to speak of oaths and roads and the price of wool and the length of feast tables, which are longer when a harvest is plentiful. I will speak well of the king. I like how it sounds. I will listen to how it might sound better, and I will bring those suggestions to the hand." Littlefinger, whose face worked like a man calculating the price of laughter, inclined his head. "A gardener and a mason," he said, but so low only Varys heard. "A charming marriage," Varys breathed. "Gardens and walls. The city could do with both, I dare say." Cersei turned to Robert again. "You do all this without speaking to me?" "I am speaking to you now," Robert said. "You have often wished me silent." She dipped like a blade. "I wished you sober. I see I will die with that wish." "You will die with many?" Robert said, and smiled at last, not cruelly. Just like a man who has found that night can be pushed back with a candle if one holds it near enough to the heart. "As will we all." In the meanwhile, Stannis, we will have the ledgers. Bring them to me in a hand that a soldier can read. Renly, you will have an escort as tight as a miser's purse. Barristan, you will stand as you stand. Eddard. He looked to his friend. You will look to the north. We will need it. After the court had dissolved into the work of gossip, they retreated, not as conquerors but as men who had taken a house and begun to clean it. Stannis's new chambers had a table already set with more parchment than any room should have. Ned went with him and stood like a man at a grave. Renly stood at a window and looked at the city and imagined how to paint it in words for men whose hands were soft with seasons of plucking fruit. That night there were no songs in the king's apartments. There was a map and a brother and a friend. Robert set his hand on the river like a man telling it to remember one day to be kind. We will do this, he said. We will do it, Stannis said. We will do it, Ned echoed, and the words landed like pegs in a tent, holding the night. The days that followed had the shape of labor. Stannis waded into the accounting and brought men up from depths they did not know they had fallen to by grabbing them by the collars of their vanity. He dismissed 2 minor officials before noon on his first morning and replaced them with men whose hands had ink stains that looked like they actually worked for a living. He sent guards to seize certain books from certain sellers that no one had remarked upon for years, which made Baelish smile and yawn and let him find others. He told the gold cloaks they would be paid on time and then gave them orders that made them look like guards rather than ornaments. He did not shout. He did not need to. Men could hear the iron in the floor when he walked. Renly left the city with a trail of green like a spring had decided to be a banner. He spoke to innkeepers and women at wells and loud boys playing at swords. He gave a purse to a village that had lost too many pigs to a sickness and wrote to a maester with an inquiry about swine fevers as if he truly cared. He stopped at Bitterbridge and said the right thing to the wrong person on purpose so that the right person would come to correct him. He took corrections like gifts. He arrived at Highgarden with a smile in his pocket that he had saved for Lady Marjorie because he knew the quality of courtesy when it could be profit and pleasure both. Mace Tyrell spread himself like butter on hot bread, and Olenna looked at Renly as if weighing wheat on a scale. Renly let himself be weighed and found equal. Eddard went to the Street of Steel and the Street of Sisters and the places where bastards were rumored to be a currency. He spoke to a boy with hair black as a raven's wing and saw something in the line of his jaw that made him feel old and precise at once. He wrote lists with names that were not yet accusations. He brought them to Stannis and they read them together in a silence that understood that truth was a blade that cut the hand that held it. Cersei watched and gathered men like beads on a string. She spoke with Grand Maester Pycelle and came away with dust in her mouth that tasted like consent. She spoke with her father's men and listened to how the West held grudges like treasure. She spoke with the Kettleblacks and listened to lies the way a jeweler listens to customers, with patience and a catalog of values. Jaime sparred with men who were not his equals and pretended to get something from it. He was a man who could only truly speak to equals with a sword. He stood at a balcony one evening and watched the king return from a ride with Stannis behind him and thought, idly, that a realm held together by those two was a rope tied between teeth and stone. It would hold, and then, somewhere no one predicted, it would snap. Varys went to the little birds and cooed and fed them. He put a tiny purse into a tiny hand and said, "Listen for the sound brothers make when they argue in rooms with tapestries. It's different than when strangers argue. It has more air." The child nodded and went to learn a thing he ought not have had to learn. Varys regretted it in a way he would have regretted a moth. He did not like moths. They ate cloth. He liked cloth. Littlefinger wrote to 3 men in 3 cities about 3 cargoes that did not exist. He watched the ledger Stannis seized and saw where gaps appeared like missing teeth. He did not fill them. He moved the smile from one side of his mouth to the other and hummed because a tune sometimes brings an answer faster than hunger does. The hand held counsel. It was different. It had fewer jests, and those that did come came like flint against steel and made sparks that hurt more and illuminated more. Stannis asked questions that had no wine at the bottom. He said, "Show me the numbers, and who profits, and who fears losing coin?" He said, "We will do this by the book." and then wrote a new book and forced men to read it. He asked Ned to ride the city's walls with him and see what they lacked and where they bulged. They spoke of the north and of raiders and of food. They spoke of winter because Ned's face did not know how not to. At night, Robert slept more often than he had. When he woke because of dreams of past victories rather than future losses. He rose and went to the armory and lifted a hammer that was too heavy for a king and just heavy enough for the man he had been. He glowered at it as if it were a proof he could not solve and then laughed at himself for trying to solve it. On a chill morning, Davos came to Stannis with a sheet in his hand and discomfort in his mouth. "This," he said, "is from a man who does not sign his name. He says there are whispers about the queen. He says some of the whispers have shapes. He says he knows a singer who knows a guard who—" Stannis held up a hand. "I know the whispers' shapes," he said. "We will not pull on that thread in the hall. Not yet." He rubbed his temple as if to remind it to ache later. "Eddard and I will go to the Street of Silk. There are men there who know how truth tastes when it has been watered down. You and Lord Stark," Davos said. "That makes a pair men will notice." "Good," Stannis said. "Let them notice. I do not mean to hide. I mean to make hiding seem unnecessary until it is too late." They went. The Street of Silk smelled of bruised flowers and old powder. The women watched the two lords the way cats watch men who claim not to like cats and are still worth rubbing against for the warmth. In a back room they sat with a woman whose hair had gone white too early and whose eyes had not yet given up their work. She told them things they already suspected and some they had not dared to let become thoughts. When they came out, Stannis looked at Eddard as if the other man's skin had become a map. "We will make a plan," Stannis said. "We will not throw accusations like fish to gulls. We will make the gulls hungry and then feed them stones." Eddard's mouth was a stubborn line and an ache. "We will not let a boy pay for his mother's sin," he said. "No," Stannis said. He knew which boy Ned meant. He had seen Joffrey enough to call him by his expression alone. "But we will not let a realm pay for it either." They crafted the beginnings of a trial that was not yet a trial. A series of questions that would be asked of men who thought they had come to speak of entirely other things. They spoke to Pycelle, who fumbled and recovered and showed his hands to be empty in a way that made both of them suspect what he used to have in them. They sent a message to Tywin that was not a request and not yet a demand. They asked Barristan to keep his ears to the ground in a place where most men's ears had learned to look up. Renly wrote from Highgarden that Mace was butter indeed, and that the roses were as sharp as Stannis had warned. He wrote that Marjorie had eyes like doors opening, and that she could count faster than men like to admit, and that she would not let a houseplant grow in shadow when it could flourish in sun. He wrote, without writing it in so many words, that he would marry her if the hand advised it and the king desired it, and if the old woman in the corner stopped measuring him like cloth to see if there was enough to make a cloak of. He wrote that he remembered how their mother had smelled of lemon and that Highgarden smelled of the same. He asked if he should bring some of that smell back to King's Landing. Robert read the letter and smiled until the smile hurt. "Bring it," he wrote. "Bring all the lemon you can carry, and if the wagons break under the weight of it, smell will spill on the road and we will have to live with it. Marry the girl if she will have you and if her father will let her, which he will. I want to drink with Mace and then send him away so I can speak to his mother as if she were a lord." The weeks began to set in like nails holding a plank in place. Men started to assume that Stannis would be in the council chamber before the hour and that he would hate wasting breath. They started to assume Renly would send back more oaths than a man could spend in a month. They started to assume the king would not bellow at random times like a bull used for a village's delight. They were not wrong. Men grow used to a new shape quickly. It's what lets a realm survive. It's also what teaches complacency, but that lesson was for later. One evening, as pale light died behind the city like a promise kept without joy, Stannis went to the king and found him alone, without cup or jest. Robert had the look of a man who had run a mile in a small room. "I will do it," Robert said without turning. "If the truth says to do it, I will set Cersei aside." Stannis stood. He had learned to be still near Robert because movement prompted the big man into jokes, and he had no energy for jokes tonight. "We have not yet made that truth a thing we can hold up to the sun," Stannis said. "We will. And when we do, we will present it as necessary knowledge, not as a scandal. We will ask Tywin to choose his pride as he likes. Either he keeps it and loses favor, or he gives it up and keeps coin and position. He will choose coin. He always does. It makes him more predictable than a priest." Robert laughed once and then rubbed his face as if to erase the laugh. "I did not wed for love," he said. "I wed for peace and for a promise I could not keep. I thought the marriage would bind lion to stag. Instead it gave the lion cubs and the stag a hangover." "You wed because men told you to," Stannis said. "They told you it was wise. You did not listen to me, but that was no sin then. It is only a habit. Break it." Robert turned then. "I am breaking it," he said. "I called you hand." "Yes," Stannis said. "You did not call me brother last. Do better yet." Robert looked at him a long time. "Brother," he said, and in the word there was a boy in wet breeches being scolded, and a man with a hammer, and a king looking at a field of men who would kill one another for him because he had told them to. "Brother," he said again, as if the repetition made it truer. When Stannis left, he found Davos waiting in the hall like a motto. "We will burn the realm down," Davos said, "if we do not watch the edges of this. Do you think I wish for fire?" Stannis glanced at him and saw unfeigned worry on that weathered face and softened in response. "No. We will come to the edge and walk it. We will push no man over. We will see who jumps." Davos nodded slowly. "Men like to say they were pushed," he said, "even when they jumped." "Then let them say it," Stannis answered. "We will give them not a hand to accuse but a cliff to contemplate." He returned to his work. Renly returned to the city with roses and promises like threads of silk. He brought Marjorie with him for a fortnight to let Cersei see the girl who would be a queen in time if the brothers had their way. Cersei looked at Marjorie and smiled like a woman watching a daughter she had never wanted to bury. She offered tea and took none. Marjorie spoke to her as if she had not heard of fear. She simply used it for embroidery. Joffrey watched from a place near a pillar and held his mouth in a shape he thought men would fear. He was a boy who had been told a sword would make him a man and believed it. He watched his uncles and did not yet know which he hated. He watched the way men looked at them and hated that most. Sansa dreamed more than she had planned to, and Arya held her dreams like weapons and cut them down to size. The city breathed, and sometimes the breath caught. A day came that did not announce itself as different. The sun rose where it had always risen, and the river's smell was the same. But in a certain room Stannis spread 3 parchments and laid down 3 tokens, and Ned came with 2 names in his mouth, and Robert came sober, and they made a plan with the economy of men who had learned that the longer they explained a thing, the more likely it was that senselessness would creep in. They decided how to call a hearing that was not a hearing, whether to ask Pycelle to attend, whether to send for certain guards. They decided to write to Lord Tywin to request his presence for a matter that touched his honor without naming it, with language that let a lord choose how loudly to refuse. They decided to keep Renly away from that room because flowers do their work better when they are not present at the pruning. And in the quiet that fell afterward, Robert found he could breathe. He went to the practice yard, where Barristan and the Hound had made a teaching of brutality for men who thought a good slash is a plan. He took up a lighter hammer and knocked a soldier flat with an ease that surprised no one and delighted him in a way that embarrassed him and made him hide it with boast. The Hound grunted approval without making it pretty. Barristan bowed slightly, and in his eyes there was something like a memory of boys who had risen early to impress a father who did not think to be impressed. That night the king ate with his brothers and did not drink wine. He ate meat and bread and an onion that Davos had sent up, because sometimes an old siege's memory is a better tonic than grapes. They spoke little. They did not need to. When the storm came again, it came like applause against the shutters. Somewhere in the city, in a room with a door that had been marked once in chalk and then wiped with a sleeve until the chalk became part of the wood, a singer told a story about 3 brothers who had met in a hall and not killed one another afterward. He sang it badly. The coins he got were thin. But a boy heard and carried the story out into the street, and a woman heard and took it into her kitchen, and a man in a gold cloak heard and told another who owed him dice money, and so the tale went the way tales go when a realm is turning. On the third morning after they made their plan, the sky was so clean it hurt to look at. Stannis went early to the council room and found Eddard there already, pale with the severity of a man who knows what must be done and detests that he is the one to do it. Robert came later, and when he came with his crown on his brow and a plain cloak on his shoulders. "We will do this," he said. "We will not shout. We will not stagger. We will set a thing right and then we will eat." They went out together. The hall was ready. What waited there? The question with teeth, the lion with choices, the city pricking its ears, was not yet a battle, not yet a war. It was a moment before a door. Brothers went to it, and one put his hand to the latch, and one set his shoulder to the frame, and one smiled at the attendants because he could not help making men easier on such mornings. The door opened. What comes after belongs to later telling, to other nights when storms press their weight on ceilings and the shutters rattle, to other mornings when a man sits a horse and makes a choice about whether to turn his head to see who is with him. For now there was only the sense of a realm like a living thing that had been bruised and found someone to set its bone. They entered, and the air shaped itself around a new fact. House Baratheon, for this hour at least, had remembered it had 3 hearts and could make of them one beat. The hall made a noise like water, in a throat and then quieted because silence in such rooms is a command and not a lack. Robert mounted no steps. He stood at the base of the dais as if it were a hill he could climb later if he elected to. Stannis took the right hand's place not as a courtesy but like a man laying a hand on the shoulder of a stubborn animal, patient and ready. Renly stood left with a pleasant face that could be read from the back of the room as ease and from the front as calculation. "Bring Maester Pycelle," Stannis said, not loudly. His voice found the rafters anyway. "And the book." Pycelle came with the slowness of a man who collects dignity on each stair and cannot afford to let a single coin fall. A page carried the lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms with both arms as if it might wriggle free. Pycelle set the book on a stand and opened it, and the small cramped letters looked like a field of ants around which the great lords were pretending to be statues. "There are treaties and there are truths," Stannis said. "Today we look at the second to preserve the first." He inclined his head to Robert, a gesture not of deference but of mechanics, like a man moving a weight from one shoulder to another. Robert nodded. "We will have it plain," he said. "Pycelle, tell them about the Baratheon seed." Pycelle coughed as if to clear his throat of a century. Many of the great houses," he began, fingers brushing the page with grave affection, "breed true in certain attributes. We have many examples." He found the passage he could find in his sleep. Notably, in House Baratheon, the hair in lawful issue has been black as coal in the manner of the founder Orys Baratheon, and the eyes, more often than not, blue or near to it. This is recorded and remarked upon, both by Maester Childer and by— "Enough names," Stannis said. "The point." "The point," Pycelle said, clutching the book lightly as if at sea and the page a plank, "is that in unions with houses of a different caste, the trait persists. Dominant, one might say, if we were an order of natural philosophers." Renly's smile did not move, but his eyes flicked once to Cersei where she stood in polished stillness near the foot of the throne. She did not need the chair to make herself tall. Jaime stood at a remove, not so far as to be forgotten, not so near as to be challenging, at ease like a cat in a sun patch. "And here," Stannis said, "we come to an unbeautiful arithmetic." Ned stepped forward with papers in his hand that were not grand, just lists written in a plain northern script. "Before Jon Arryn died," he said, "and after I went where he went, I spoke to those he had sought. I found the king's bastard sons and daughters. Not all, but some." He did not look at Cersei. He looked at Robert, and that was worse. Black hair, blue eyes, again and again. A murmur moved through the room, not loud but attentive as cloth rubbing together. Varys blinked mildly. a man hearing nothing new and being sad about it with ornate restraint. Littlefinger examined a hangnail as if it had an investment in the matter. Robert lifted a hand and gave the air a shape. "We will not sell scandal in the hall," he said. "We will not call names before we have spoken as a house." He turned toward the queen. "Cersei." She stepped forward unbidden and bowed only as much as a crown lets a woman bow without suggesting that it may slip. "Your Grace." The words came cool. "You have invited a book to my table." "I have invited a truth," Robert said, "and I have asked it to sit." "Truths," she said, and the smile that put its mouth on her words was sharp as a hairpin, "are often chosen for their good manners." Pycelle coughed again, but Stannis's glance turned the cough into a swallowed frog. Robert did not look at Jaime, though he could feel the Kingslayer like heat at his left shoulder. "There are two paths," Robert said. "One where we make a noise for the city and feed it what it wants. The other where we bind up a break quietly and keep the limb. I will take the second." "And what limb is that?" Cersei asked. "Your marriage." "My realm," Robert said. She tilted her head. It was not quite contempt. It was assessment. "You are late to thinking about it." "I am here now," he said, and his voice softened in the way that meant he was not going to be softened. "You will return to Casterly Rock with honor. You will be owed no small thanks for years served as queen. No one will touch you with chains or words. The children go with you. They are not to be harmed by any tongue. An order will go out to that effect with the same force as a levy in war. Tywin will be summoned to hear this and add his pride where it does not break the plank. And I," he added, "will name my heir by the law." The hall did not breathe. It waited. Cersei's eyes narrowed to the work of a moment. She looked at Stannis then, openly, and this time there was contempt and also calculation. "There is a law you respect now?" she asked. "There always was," Stannis said. "You have thrived in a fog. We are opening shutters." "And what?" Cersei asked, letting the question be a drawl. "Is the law's name today?" "The one we have always had," Stannis said. "The king's trueborn issue inherits. When there is none. When he has no sons," Renly put in silkily. "It passes according to the line and the custom, to his brother." Cersei looked at Renly and did not hide her disdain so prettily as usual. "You'll look better with a crown than without," she said. "And you know it. I am almost glad to be rid of you at my table if you must dress at another's." "Not mine," Renly said at once. "Do not sew me that cloak. It does not fit." He turned his face a fraction to give the hall his profile, which was better than most men's full attention. "The law names Stannis before me, and it will be the law, my lady, not my mirror." Pycelle clutched at his beard and found it still as a dead cat. Jaime's mouth relaxed into something like a smirk and then sharpened again to attention. He was not here to make faces, he reminded himself. He was here to hear danger approach. Robert raised a hand and the hall's whispering died. "We will say no more of it in this room." He turned to Barristan. "Sir." "Your Grace." The old knight's white cloak made a clean line down the front of the world. "You will see the queen to her chambers," Robert said. "With honor. No guard who takes a bribe from the west will go with you. Ser Aerys will attend." "Sir Preston, Sir Boros." "Jaime, you will remain." Cersei's chin angled a little higher. "You lock me like a lady in a song," she said. "I keep you from fools," Robert answered. "There are fools on both sides of this." "On all sides," Cersei said. "Do not forget a fourth." She left with Barristan. The hall broke into rivulets then, men running to tell the versions of the moment that would buy them supper. Stannis dismissed Littlefinger with one glance and a note handed to a squire. Peter read and smiled. A request for the loan ledgers from the past 5 years, including the sums to the Iron Bank. He folded the paper and bowed as if he had been given a jewel, and when he turned away his lips pressed thin. The Iron Bank was a name he liked to let others say. It made them frightened to imagine a thing they could not touch. Stannis was doing the opposite. He was calling the fog down and making the shapes plain. Varys bowed himself into the air and drifted toward the nearest roomer. He would touch them all lightly, like a man testing bolts on a door.
Ned stayed.
Jaime stayed as commanded. The door closed. The room was smaller then, and the air thicker because it was full of old things. "Sir Jaime," Robert said. Jaime let his shoulder find the stone and did not lean more than cried aloud. "Your Grace, the truth will be seen," Robert said. "If it walks out under its own feet or if we drag it by the hair, that will be your choice now. If you would like to keep your head high when we are done, speak to me as a man, not as a lion." Jaime considered defiance. He picked it up, weighed it, felt where it would cut his palm. He set it down. "You speak of law," he said. "If you push it through a hall full of men with names, it will splinter into politics. If you carry it into a small room and make a bargain, it may do the work without getting blood on the walls." "Speak plain," Stannis said. "I have never done anything else," Jaime said, and his smile was brief and honest. "I will say this. I will not confess anything that sends my sister to a block. If you want to move the board without overturning it, you will send her away with children intact and names properly dressed for travel. You have said as much. Good. Do it. And do not ask a Kingsguard to cut his family to pieces with his own hand. I took vows. I also have blood. I live with both." Stannis's mouth thinned. "You took vows. And so did you," Jaime said, "to hold this realm. Here you are doing it." He lifted one shoulder. "There is a shape where this does not become war. I can see it. You can see it." Robert's hand, open on the table, closed and then opened again. "There is," he said, "and you will help us walk it." "I will help you keep blades sheathed," Jaime said. "Do not ask more." "Then listen," Stannis said, and the plan unrolled between them like a rug. They would not call the whole court to a spectacle. They would not throw seed and hair into the street and see how the dogs tore it. They would do 3 things at once. Send to the Rock with a letter that used no vulgarity and plenty of truth. Secure the city so that no sudden order could turn the watch, and give the queen a path out that preserved her children and her father's face as much as faces of such kind could be preserved. "Yano Slint," Ned said at once. "He will sell his men twice before breakfast. Then he will not be captain," Stannis said. "Find me a man who would rather be hungry than be bought." "Sir Jacelyn Bywater," Ned said. "He's no friend of mine. He's no friend of anyone. He is as straight as a spear and as pleasant." "Good," Stannis said. "Find him. Bring him. If he balks, tell him it's a command. If he smirks, send him away." "He will not smirk," Ned said. "He has not the muscle." They sent for Bywater. He came with a face that looked as if it had been carved with the least possible wasted chisel strokes. Stannis set out what was required and Bywater nodded once and asked a single question. "May I choose 2 of my own sergeants from outside the city?" "You may," Stannis said. "Choose men who would rather sleep under an eve in rain than in a whore's lap on my coin." Bywater inclined his head. "There is such a breed," he said, and went away to fetch it. In the queen's chambers, Cersei stood before a mirror and had her women strip her of her jewels. She did not fling them. She did not break them. She set them in a velvet-lined chest and closed the lid. Her face in the mirror did not change. Her hands were steady. "Pack and unpack," she told the women calmly. "Fold and unfold. We will give the castle the appearance of activity. If the small folk think a lady is fussing, they are content to think nothing else." When they left her, she stood very still and stared at herself until the mirror's silver began to make her look like a ghost of a colder land. Jaime came. He closed the door without sound. "They offer me a road," she said. "I am to walk it as a penitent with her jewels carried behind her." "They offer you a road without mud up to the knee," Jaime said. "We can walk it and not drown." She turned then, and the gentleness in her face was the most dangerous thing she ever wore. "You would leave them to call our children by other names," she said. "I would leave them breathing," he said. "Names are banners. We can make more. Breath is breath." "We are to be grateful," she murmured. "We are to be alive to be angry tomorrow," he said. She looked at him with a smile that had nothing happy in it. "My father will not be handled like a purse," she said. "He will not be taxed and thanked." "I know," Jaime said. "They will try to offer him a mouthful of honor and a meal of coin. He likes both. He will swallow." "You think him so simple," she said. "I think him so proud," Jaime answered. "Pride eats the same whether you call it a feast or a famine." She moved close then and put her hands on his chest and leaned her forehead against him. And for a moment she looked as young as she had been in a garden behind the rock. "I will not weep," she said. "I will not scratch. I will not bite. I will not give them a story to sell. I will go to our father and then—" She did not finish. It was a promise to herself more than to him. "Then we live," he said, "and see what lives with us." Renly, by then, had his lemon-scented letter returned with Tyrell wax upon it and the elder rose's thorn beneath. He rode back for a time and then forward again, because there is a gate that is neither retreat nor advance but preparation. Olenna Tyrell had told him, with shameless brevity and a piece of honeycake between two fingers, that a marriage might be useful if he were willing to be amused by a wife who would not be amused by him. He had laughed. She had not. He had admired her for it. Marjorie had looked at him as if he were a page of music and she a harpist determining whether the song was worth her strings. "We will marry," Renly had said frankly in the private garden near the summer pond where faint frogs made patterns in the green. "If it suits you. I will travel too much and talk too much and laugh more than is good for me. I will also keep the king merry and the hand supplied with bread. You will get gardens in winter. You will also get letters which you will answer with the parts one forget to write." Marjorie had laughed then and said he charmed like a man who had been told there was a mirror behind every door and wanted to show his best profile. "I will marry you," she said. "If my father agrees. He will agree." She twirled a sprig of mint between two fingers. "My grandmother says you are almost honest, which is more pleasant than handsome men usually are." "And you?" he said. "I am not a mirror," she said, and he was gladder than he expected to be to hear it. At the Red Keep, Stannis took a key from the Lord Treasurer's ring and used it to open a door men had not noticed for years because it was not in their way. He and Ned and two scribes went into the narrow room where the smallest accounts live. Duties paid in pepper, promises made in salt, lines of weight rather than coin. "Here," Stannis said, and the scribes set to work copying the figures that Littlefinger had smiled past. "If Littlefinger truly makes money multiply," Stannis said flatly, "we will see it here. Money does not multiply. It is added. Men like me add. Men like him persuade others to miscount. Men like me spend," Robert said from the doorway, and his voice was without apology and without jest. "You will teach me to count to a number that is not 10 and then punch the man nearest to me." Stannis said only, "Eat less of winter before winter asks you to," and Robert laughed and pinched his own belly and agreed. Bywater took the city watch with a plainness that made some men sneer and more men stand straighter. He dismissed 3 captains quietly and early, before the sun could make outrage hot. He put his own men at the gates and at the armory. He spoke to them without much ornament. "Your pay will come every second day," he said. "Your rations every day. Your lashes if you steal will come the day after, and then any day you remember to try it again." They looked at him and decided he meant it. They looked at the coin when it came and decided the king meant it too. Men who are fed and paid will sometimes be loyal. Not always. Often enough to matter. A raven flew west with a letter in a hand that did not seek to charm. Stannis wrote it and Robert signed it. It did not accuse. It did not beg. It said that the king had discovered an error in inheritance that required remedy for the realm's health, and that the queen would be treated with all the honor her station deserved as she returned to her father's seat, and that the king would receive Lord Tywin or Lord Kevin for counsel and settlement. It said this without saying more. There is a way to write a challenge that looks like an invitation. Tywin Lannister read the letter at a long table that had seen more men be celebrated than loved. He did not blink more than usual. He did not rage. His jaw moved once. He sent for Kevin and for a secretary. "We will go," he said simply. "Not with banners, with names." Kevin, being Kevin, nodded and began to list what would be needed. Riders, fresh horses stabled along the road, a chest with seals, a cask of wine properly old, men who did not talk. Tywin thought of Cersei and did not let the thought show. He thought of the grandchildren he had made into pieces on a board and reminded himself, without heat, that pieces are not players. He wrote a letter that moved faster than a courier, to Pycelle, a courtesy that had meat in it, to the Rock, instructions that turned servants into tools. He did not, at that moment, send for armies. He did not think he would need them yet. Pride is not always impatient. It is only always present. On a morning firm as old bread, Eddard brought Gendry to the keep. He did not lead him like an animal. He walked and the boy followed because that is what boys do when taken by a man who does not lie to them. The heat of the forge still clung to Gendry's skin as a smell. He looked out of place only to men who had never been a boy in a city. "This is Gendry," Ned said to Robert. "Not in the hall but in a room with a window onto a small court where orange trees tried and failed. He is apprenticed to Tobo Mott. He is Baratheon, your face stamped once and without a crown." Robert looked at the boy the way a man recognizes himself in a puddle after ache and before laughter. "Come here," he said, and Gendry came. Robert put a hand on his head as if measuring height against a door. "Do you know who your mother was?" Gendry's jaw set. "A tavern wench," he said. There was pride in it because he found power in the lack of a claim. "A kind one?" Robert asked softly. "She died," Gendry said, as if that answered kindness forever. Robert's hand fell. He nodded. "You are apprenticed to a good man," he said. "He will keep you learning. If anyone troubles you for your mother's bed or your father's name, you tell Ser Jacelyn Bywater. If Bywater does not come, you tell me. If I do not come, you find a hammer and remember there is a proper way to use it." Gendry nodded once, distrustful of favors, comfortable with tools. He looked at Ned with a glance that asked a question he would not frame. Ned did not answer it. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder and steered him away and back into the honest heat of the mistake, as the street of steel named Tobo's Forge when he undercharged a lord and made a story. Arya saw Gendry go and liked the look of him because he looked like no one in the court. Sansa looked down from a balcony and thought he looked like men in songs before they were washed. They did not speak of him. They filed him away in their separate versions of the city, which had never matched and never would. That evening, when the sun slid down behind the city like a coin under a door, Robert sat with Stannis and Ned and Barristan and said, "We will ask the High Septon to come." Stannis's lip twitched in a way that would have been irritation if he were a man given to lux. "Yuri, to bless our numbers? To nod at our law," Robert said. "I have no love for his bells. I have use for his weight." "Use him," Stannis said. "Do not let him think it is his hand at the tiller." "I don't," Robert said. "I do not think that about anyone anymore." The High Septon came with the air of a man allergic to dust and forced to greet it. He was plump and placid and used to being treated as a sort of decoration the gods had placed on tables. Stannis spoke to him as to a clerk. Ned spoke to him as to a conscience. Robert spoke to him as to an uncle whose stories mattered only when they matched the harvest. The old man blinked and then, surprisingly, spoke sense. "The faith does not look kindly on unions against the laws of man or gods," he said carefully, "but it looks less kindly on blood spilled in the streets. If there is a way to remove a scandal like a splinter, we will provide what blessing we can to the tweezers." "Good," Robert said. "Bless the tweezers." The day Tywin's riders were seen, word reached the city before dust did. It always does. The court became quieter rather than louder, and that is how you know a real thing is happening. Renly returned from Highgarden not with a bride yet, but with an agreement that he made sound like a love song and Stannis translated into bushels and boots. The Tyrells would send grain. They would keep roads clear in the Reach. They would speak well of the king while speaking well of themselves. They would, if asked on the proper day with the proper witnesses, accept a match between Marjorie and Renly. pending the Queen's settlement and the realm's sigh of relief. Olenna sent a lemon and a note that said only, "Taste before you bite." Tywin arrived with Lord Kevin and a dozen men who rode like the points of a comb. He came into the city as if it did not impress him, which it did not. He wore no lion's roar on his chest, only the color of clear coin. At the Red Keep he dismounted without waiting to be offered a hand and gave his reins to a boy who had never held anything so expensive and did not drop them because he did not wish to die that day. They met in the small council chamber because it had walls and because the throne room is a theater that states its message too loudly for certain plays. Robert entered first and stood with his back to the window. Stannis sat because a hand sits in council as a function of his office, not as a grace. Ned stood with a paper he did not wave. Pycelle drooped like an old curtain. Varys drifted to a corner where shadows pretended to be his friends. Littlefinger made a picture of polite interest and placed it on his face. Tywin came in and bowed as much as he had to and no more. Kevin bowed enough for two and then some. "Lord Tywin," Robert said, "thank you for coming so quickly." Tywin looked right past the thanks to the ledger behind it. "Your letter used few words," he said. "I imagine you found more." Stannis folded his hands. "We have found enough." "You mean you have decided enough," Tywin said. His eyes took in Stannis and Ned and moved on to Robert again. "I hope that you are prepared to make certain decisions palatable to those asked to swallow them." "You speak of your daughter," Stannis said. "I speak of my house," Tywin said. "The one is the other," Renly murmured from the wall. "At least here." Tywin ignored him. "Tell me," he said to Robert, "where you intend to place your feet." "Not on your neck," Robert said. "We will spare one another the theater. I will not shed your blood. You will not threaten mine. Your daughter will return to your care with honor. No whisper will be permitted against the children. The faith will frown upon what must be frowned upon and then smile upon what serves us. The law will be read. The succession will be set to rights." Tywin's face, which had been carved long ago and left to dry, did not crack. "Set to rights," he repeated, as if tasting the phrase for poison. "At what cost to my house?" "Titles remain. Holdings remain," Stannis said. "Debts remain, repaid at a schedule that will not weaken the crown. You will retain the wardenship of the West. You will see that no coin is spent on crows in gold cloaks without receipt and record. You will not whisper war. In return, none of your kin will be named in public by any word that leaves a stain that cannot be washed." "And my grandchildren?" Tywin said. Kevin's mouth moved once and then was still. "They will be Lannisters," Robert said softly, "not Baratheons." Tywin looked at him then with a slow interest, a man hearing a note in a familiar song that he had never thought to notice. "You would take from yourself the things men call yours." "I do not have them," Robert said. "Taking them or leaving them does not change the truth." "Truth," Tywin said, "a word short of law and longer than convenience. You would send my daughter away under the name of honor. You would keep my sons where they are." "Jaime remains in white," Stannis said. "Tyrion remains in wine unless you decide to give him something else to drink." Tywin's nostrils flared, a notice that he was not made entirely of coin. "You tempt me," he said. "Tyrion is a glass of vinegar in most men's mouths. I may give him a cask to turn to use." "Do," Renly said pleasantly. "He will laugh at you less if you give him tasks to laugh about." Tywin ignored him again. He looked at Ned. "And you, Lord Stark, you stand here as if the North had never bled for a southern quarrel and never would again." "The North will bleed if the realm tears," Ned said. "I am here to stitch while I may." "And if I do not accept your needle?" Tywin asked. "Then you will find a realm that does not hold your weight as well as you think," Stannis said. "You may try to sit upon it anyway. You will find yourself on the floor." Tywin's eyes drifted to Pycelle as if to ask whether the Grand Maester would cough him a better answer. Pycelle coughed out of habit and said nothing. Varys's hands rested like white birds on his soft lap. Littlefinger's smile moved from thoughtful to harmless and back. "Your Grace," Tywin said at last to Robert, and the shift to the king was noticeable. "You propose to treat my daughter with courtesy." "I do," Robert said. "And you propose to stop tongues with threat." "I do," Robert said. "And you propose to rewrite a sentence that was written in a public wedding," Tywin said. "I propose to correct a record," Robert said, "and to leave you all the face a man can reasonably request." Tywin's jaw worked. He looked then, finally, at Stannis with a regard that was not war and not peace. "And if I take this," he said, "what do you offer me beyond the absence of humiliation?" Stannis did not blink. "We offer you a crown that pays its debts." Tywin's mouth made a shape that could, from a certain angle, be mistaken for a smile. "That," he said, "would be a novelty." "Not a novelty," Stannis said. "A habit." He tapped a page with 2 fingers. "No more mumming birds who are paid thrice and sing once. No more bales of Myrish lace at prices that shame sense. No more loans at rates that make sense for pirates. We will have the sums. We will pay them. You will not have to send your agents to comb the city for what the crown owes." "And you think that buys my silence?" Tywin asked. "I think it buys your consent to live comfortably in a realm that continues to exist," Stannis said. "Silence is a poor coin to ask for. We ask for restraint. We offer the same. We will not sing about your daughter. You will not sing about ours." Tywin considered then, really considered, and in that consideration there was the moving of pieces as cleanly and as coldly as a man laying the parts of a clock. Robert watched him and found, not for the first time, that he had a grudging admiration for how thoroughly a lion can think without roaring. "Very well," Tywin said at last. Kevin let out a breath that could have inflated a sail. "We will not like it. You will not require us to like it. You will draft language that states that the marriage is— what word do you prefer, Lord Hand?" "Dissolved," Stannis said. "Set aside. There are terms. The faith will have its say." "The faith will say what it is told to say," Tywin murmured, and for the first time glanced with real interest at Varys, who tilted his head and smiled a little, a man being discovered behind a curtain and not minding it. "The faith will say what keeps the city from burning," Robert said. "We all have the same goal today." "Then have it," Tywin said. "We will take our leave of the court when the time comes. We will go to the rock. We will remain a pillar rather than a hammer. If my grandchildren's names are spoken with respect in the streets, I will not need to hear them at court." "They will be," Robert said, and for once his voice held no braggadocio. "They will be." After Tywin left, the air in the room loosened as if a string had been cut. Renly grinned. "It is not often one sees a lion choose coin over claw so gracefully." "He did not choose coin," Stannis said. "He chose certainty." "Which has coin in it," Littlefinger murmured. "So much coin." Robert leaned back against the table and then sat because his legs wanted that. "We will do this with as little noise as a man can make while pulling a splinter the size of a sword," he said. "We will give the city bread that day." "We will," Stannis said. "Bywater has already requisitioned grain from the river barges." "Of course he has," Renly said. "How comforting to live among men who do the thing before it is spoken." "That comfort will pass," Littlefinger said pleasantly. "It always does." Davos, in the corridor afterward, asked Stannis whether he believed Lord Tywin would keep his teeth to himself. "He smiled," Davos said dryly. "I do not trust smiles on men who polish their teeth that often." "Tywin will keep his word because it is a word he gave himself," Stannis said. "He will go home and count. He will add. He will prepare chances. We will do the same." "And if someone cannot live with this peace?" Davos asked. "Someone will not," Stannis said. "It does not matter who. It matters only that when he barks, he is not joined by a pack. That is the business of this week." The city, for its part, did what cities do when the big men move carefully. It went about its business and let rumor do the walking. Bakers baked. Whores laughed and then did not laugh and then laughed again. A gold cloak told another in a low voice that the queen had worn mourning-colored silk to the sept that afternoon, and the other gold cloak said that mourning could be for many things, and that he mourned the loss of a captain who had made dice games expensive. The sept bells rang in a pattern that made the old think of weddings and the young think of markets. On the appointed day, the great September of Baelor smelled of incense and lemon and the breath of too many people trying to breathe quietly. Cersei came in green without the shout of jewels. She walked like a woman who has refused to stumble for so long that even the floor has learned to forgive her. Tywin walked with her until the sacristy door and then stopped, because even lions know the line between coin and prayer. Jaime stood at her right shoulder as a wall that could move. Tommen looked as if he might cry and had not yet remembered not to. Myrcella looked like a picture of patience that had been painted by a hand that knew what patience costs. Joffrey held his chin up as if the bone might break otherwise. Robert stood opposite with Stannis and Ned and the High Septon between them, and Barristan 3 steps back as a white tree grown in a place that needed shade. The hall packed itself with lords and ladies like a box of used perfume. The people of the city watched from the steps and the square outside, because this was as close as they wished to come to holiness. The High Septon spoke words he had not expected to be saying this year. He spoke of vows and the sorrow of their failing. He spoke of the peace of the realm as a thing that might require men to do the more painful right instead of the easier wrong. He did not name sins. He named futures. He intoned in a voice that even those who hated him had to admit could wash a stain if you let it. Cersei, when asked if she would return home to her father's care with honor, said, "I will," in a voice that made a dozen ladies press lips tight and memorize the strength for their own uses later. Robert, when asked if he would refrain from words that taint children, said, "I will," in a voice that made a dozen men look down because they had not known he could be gentle when it lacked an audience. Tywin did not speak. He stood and was agreed with by the space around him. Jaime did not speak. His silence had a weight. Joffrey did not speak because he was not asked, and he felt that as a wound that would not show blood. Tommen did not speak because he could not. He swallowed a sob and became dearer to the small folk than any prince had a right to be. Myrcella bowed her head when she was named and did not let her hair fall to hide her face. When it was over, the city exhaled. Men who had expected blood found none and felt cheated and relieved. The bells rang a pattern that meant settlement. Bread was given at the sept steps. Renly's idea and paid for with coin Stannis had shaken loose by making the master of coin turn his pockets out and then use them to carry loaves rather than secrets. The people took and ate and spoke the king's name with less spit at the end of it than usual. Cersei returned to the keep with dignity enough to be noted. That night she knelt before her children and told them they were going to see their grandsire and that it would be a grand thing. She told Joffrey he would ride at the head of a column and be seen by men who had not yet learned to fear him. She told Myrcella that she would see roses clinging to stone and learn how to open anyone's door with her smile. She told Tommen he would see kittens again at the Rock, because Casterly Rock always had kittens in some nook and he had loved them when he was smaller and would love them again now. She told them all not to be ashamed. She did not tell them anything else. She could not fit the rest into a night. Jaime returned to the white cloaks and stood their watches with a new steadiness, because when you choose not to pull a house down, your arms have a job and your head has a rest. He kept his eyes open. He watched Stannis and tried to learn the language of a man he did not like. He watched Ned and remembered a tower and a day and the taste of dust, and tried not to hate a stranger for a memory. He watched Robert and thought that the king looked more like the man he had first thought him than he ever had since. Varys moved through the city and gathered the tone of the day. It was, astonishingly, gratitude. There had been a moment when the world might have burst like a rotten fruit. It had not. People feel gratitude for not being splashed with rot, even if they still smell it. He took that tone in his hands and carried it carefully to a dozen places, and when he set it down it grew smaller and denser, like a seed that waited. Littlefinger went home to his ledgers and found that Stannis' hands had been through them with a soldier's neat cruelty. There were dots where numbers had been, and underlines where poetry had once danced between columns. He sat and looked at what had been taken and what had been left and smiled with genuine pleasure, because a new game is better than an old prophet. He took a sheet of paper and began to write a list of men who would not survive a city in which sums mattered. He wondered which men Stannis considered his and which he considered available. He did not intend to be available to anyone other than himself. Renly wrote to Highgarden. Now, he used more words. He made them pretty. He told Marjorie the Queen's carriage would be leaving within a fortnight, and that the city felt like a man who has stood up too fast and then steadied. He said, in a sentence, that he would ask her father for her hand on a day that would flatter the roses best and be noticed least by anyone who got angry when flowers were brought inside. Olenna wrote back, "Come." Mace wrote, "Bring wine." Marjorie wrote nothing, because her letter would be her arrival. Stannis set about the work that is only beautiful to men who love lines straight. He signed orders for the armories to be inspected and repaired before winter. He wrote to Lords Manderly and Redwine about ships and salt fish and coin. He summoned the harbor master and made him list the losses to leakage that could be stopped by men who knew how to hammer a pitch seam. He sat with Davos in the evening and said nothing for long minutes, which is how men like them rest. Ned went to the Godswood and stood under a tree that was not a heart tree and prayed to a god who listened anyhow because Ned spoke without ornament. He asked for the strength not to break again what had just been mended. He asked for his girls to keep their sense in a city that had very little. He asked for the North to be allowed to remain itself. He did not ask for his own honor because men like him always assume honor is a thing you carry even when it goes light. When he returned to the keep, he met Arya in a corridor with her hair coming loose and a look that promised someone had been scolded for noticing her sword. He took the sword from her and weighed it and handed it back because it weighed nothing and meant much, and he had to choose his battles. On the day the Queen left, the sky was a blank sheet. Tywin rode at the head of a shorter column than the city had expected and a tighter one. He gave no one a chance to count his men and feel brave. Cersei rode in a carriage with its curtains open enough to see her and closed enough to give her a choice about when she was seen. Joffrey rode on a palfrey and tried to look as if he deserved a destrier. The small folk cheered him because they had been told not to hiss and because boys on horses look safe at a distance. Myrcella smiled and garnered honest smiles in return. Tommen waved and collected love like a boy picks up stones and keeps them in a pocket until it rips. Robert stood with his brothers and watched them go. He did not wave. He did not scowl. He stood like a man who has decided to pick up a piece of his own life and see whether it still fits his hand. "Will it hold?" Renly murmured. "It will hold until it doesn't," Stannis said. "Then we had better be ready for that day," Robert said. "Until then, we will do something no one expects. We will govern." "Imagine," Renly said, delighted and sincere. They went back inside then and into the day's work. Letters waited like stacked plates. Petitioners waited like wind. There were lawsuits about docks and debts about wine. There were two lords both named Harbert who claimed the same strip of riverbank, and Stannis sent them away with a survey to be done by two men neither of them paid. There was a singer who wanted to be paid for a song he claimed had saved a life, and Renly paid him and then made him sing for 3 hours in the yard to earn it. There was a boy caught stealing a loaf who was given work carrying water and a warning that was not a threat but a promise of less mercy next time. There was a woman who swore a gold cloak had taken liberties and coined both. Bywater delivered the man in irons and 2 teeth short and presented him with the dignity of a man who keeps his house clean. At dusk, Barristan stood with Jaime in a practice yard that had cooled as the stone breathed out its heat. They traded blows eye, in a manner that was almost friendly. "You have held your tongue," Barristan said as if remarking on weather. "I am learning," Jaime said. "It hurts." "It does," Barristan agreed. "That is how we know it is learning." "You are loyal to him," Jaime said, pausing, sweat running like rain from a gutter at his temple. "Always have been, even when he forgot himself." "I am loyal to the crown," Barristan said, "and to the idea of a man doing his best to bear it. The king has remembered to try." Jaime laughed once, short. "A miracle. A habit if we keep it," Barristan said, and they went on, steel ringing like a kind of prayer. In the east, beyond men's maps, a girl rode with a khalasar and learned to sit a saddle and bear a weight of eyes. In King's Landing, Varys let the thought cross his mind and then let it go. He did not need dragons to complicate his mourning. He had enough men for that. Winter sent an early messenger in the form of a wind that found its way under doors. Manderley wrote that the harbors would be freezing sooner than they liked if the north wind came down as it wished to. Stannis wrote back with schedules for casks of oil and orders for stores to be laid up by the river. He did not have to tell Ned to watch the sky. Ned was already watching it. From the Vale came a letter with Lisa Aaron's hand trembling at the edges of each word. She had chosen to be a mountain rather than a bridge and intended to keep choosing it. The hand read the letter and wrote a reply that did not beg and did not command. He did not send it yet. He let it sit on the corner of his desk like a loaf cooling, because some words are better when the heat leaves them. From the Riverlands came a whisper that Ser Gregor Clegane had been seen riding too far from his lands with too many men for a hunt. Stannis sent quietly for a list of household guard counts and patrol rosters from all the lords between the Green Fork and the Blackwater. He did not publicly denounce anyone. He let his attention be known by the work it created. Papers are a kind of warning when they come from the hand. Renly, with a rose pinned and a plan drawn in his smile, set the date for his wedding with Marjorie Tyrell. It would be held in the city, not in Highgarden, at Mace's insistence and at Olenna's permission, because it would be good for people to see flowers in King's Landing at a time when they expected thorns and got them anyway. Robert agreed and pretended to grumble. Stannis called it a distraction and then set a list of costs he would approve and a longer list he would not. Renly sent a note back with 3 flourishes and a promise to keep his bride in roses that did not cut the crown's fingers. Sansa glowed at the thought of a wedding that might be something like the songs promised. Arya blinked at it and asked if Marjorie would be allowed to carry a knife beneath her garter. Sansa said that was vulgar. Arya said it was sensible. They continued to be sisters while the city learned to be a different kind of city. One night, after a day spent in numbers, Stannis sat alone with a candle and a memory of Dragonstone's wind and found himself missing Maester Cresson the way a man misses a chair he did not think he sat in often. He wrote a brief letter to the old man's hand. The king is learning to count. The realm is learning to breathe. I am learning to speak less and be heard more. He did not write of the Red Woman because he had not yet asked Davos to tell him what he thought of her and did not intend to think of her until he had to. There was enough fire in the city without inviting any more. Robert took to walking the city at odd hours with a small guard and no heralds. He bought a sausage from a man who had not recognized him until the coin passed and then bowed so low he nearly put his head in the mustard. He put a hand on the black mane of a horse in a stable where no one thought a king would come and remembered the comfort of beasts who do not ask you for anything you cannot give. He went into a sept with 3 candles and out again with none because he had lit them and decided that was a good use of wax. He broke up a fight between 2 boys with a bark and a look and then laughed at himself when he realized he had been glad to be obeyed for a reason that had nothing to do with crowns. He returned to the Red Keep that night and found Ned by the river gate, looking outward. "Another storm?" Robert asked. "The same one," Ned said. "It moves. It does not end." "We will move with it," Robert said, "or we will outlast it. Both are victories. Both are work," Ned said. Robert thumped him on the shoulder companionably and did not apologize when it bruised. "Good thing we brought a man who loves work." In the weeks that followed, there were petty revolts of pride and quiet capitulations. A guildmaster who had thought himself a prince found himself a man with a warehouse and an honest ledger. A hedge knight who had thought to sell his sword to Whispers discovered there was less coin in the city for that trade. 2 of Varys's little birds brought word of a plot to set fires on the night of Renly's wedding so that the city would remember to fear and forget to celebrate. Bywater's men were waiting at 3 corners. The 4th never lit. The men who would have struck sulfur woke in cells and had the surprise of finding themselves asked questions politely by a smuggler with a knight's rings instead of a torturer with a fashion for knives. They told Davos everything out of pure confusion. Renly's wedding was as much restraint as it was show because that is what a city learns to love when it has nearly burned. Marjorie walked like a girl weaned on eyes and kindly toward them. Olenna sat like a queen of a kingdom no one could invade because it was her mind. Mace swelled like bread near an oven. The High Septon intoned and remembered to bless both households and fruit and fertility and coin, and Stannis endured incense as one endures an in-law. Robert drank less than anyone expected and laughed more, and when he danced with the bride he did it as a father might, and when he gave the groom a clap on the back he did not knock him down. In the corner of the feast, Tyrion Lannister returned from a trip to the Trident with a saddlebag of stories and a mind made to mischief that the city did not need and also could not do without. He bowed to Stannis as to a toothache and smiled at Renly like a man measuring a hat. He spoke with Varys, which is to say he fenced with him. He drank with Davos and made the Onion Knight laugh in two places Davos had forgotten could laugh. He went to his sister's empty chambers and stood very still and did not drink there. "Here we are," he said later to Jaime, by a window where the night air grew cool and clean. "Peace, wrapped in paper that might tear." "Do you miss knives?" Jaime asked. "I miss predictability," Tyrion said. "War is predictable. Peace requires men to behave." "We will teach them," Jaime said. "You will teach with that sword," Tyrion said, nodding at the blade by Jaime's hip. "Others will teach with numbers. I will teach with jokes. We will see which lesson keeps longest." Time, which always chooses how to move without asking permission, moved through the rooms and the streets and the high halls. Winter crept down with a chill that made bakers bless their ovens and children wish for better boots. The crown's debt began to untangle like net in steady hands. Ships tied up nose to tail on the Blackwater with grain and salt cod and barrels of lamp oil. The city watch did not look richer, but it looked fed. The small folk said the king had remembered the city. The lords said the king had remembered his purse. Both were correct enough. And always, beyond the edges of the map, men were drawing with careful law and careful promises. There were things that did not like carefulness. Up the King's Road, a band of men without banners found it harder to collect coin for their swords and easier to find anger at their lack of trade. Ser Gregor Clegane rode back to his holdfast and found a letter waiting that set a weight on his table heavier than his sword. A polite inquiry from the hand about the distance of his last hunt. He crumpled it and threw it in the fire and then thought better and pulled it out half-burned and sent it back with a thumbprint of soot and a message that might be read as an apology if one were generous and as a warning if one knew him. Stannis filed it and began the process of measuring every lord with more horse than teeth. In Old Town, a maester wrote a paper about the breeding of traits in noble houses and sent a copy to Pycelle, who read the first paragraph and fell asleep and drooled on an illustration of a dark-haired boy and a golden-haired girl. In Bravos, a man with a long face and longer memory noted that the Iron Throne had sent a payment on time and lifted his eyebrows a fraction. He said to his clerk, "Interesting," and underlined a name. In Pentos, a fat man performed a calculation that included the words call, girl, egg, and storm, and told himself out loud that he preferred coins he could stack rather than dragons he could not. At the Red Keep, one morning that looked like any other morning if you did not know what to look for, Robert stood in a room with his brothers and Eddard Stark and said, "We have kept the peace." "For now," Stannis said. "For now," Robert agreed. "It is the only kind of peace there ever is." He moved to the window then and looked out at the river that had carried so many hopes and bodies and barges of grain. He set a hand on the sill and the stone was colder than his palm. "I will hunt," he said suddenly, half turning, as if the thought had jumped the line and demanded to be served. "A boar, not wine. Do not make your faces. I will ride with a small party that cannot be bribed or fooled into letting me crash at the wrong moment. I will return with meat and a mood that does not frighten children. We will keep making our sums. We will keep letting bread fall from our tables to the places in the city where it will be good gossip." "Take Selmy," Stannis said at once. "And Bywater second," Ned added. "And me," Renly put in cheerfully. "I look well in the greenwood." Robert laughed, and there was a catch in it, a memory of another hunt and another summer when laughter had been less expensive. "I'll take Selmy and your man, Ned," he said. "Renly, you will stay and let Marjorie teach you to be married. It will be harder work than you think." "It always is," Renly said, and smiled toward a corner where Marjorie would not have been if this were a different kind of court and therefore was not now. Stannis did not smile. He did not frown. He touched the papers before him as if reminding them to behave and said, "Be careful. I am a careful man," Robert said, and for once no one in the room felt moved to argue. When he had gone to make ready, Ned stayed and looked at Stannis and saw, in the stern lines and the newly acquired habit of patience, a thing he had not expected to like, a steward of a realm that could yet hold. "We will have trouble still," Ned said, "from those who profit by chaos." "We always will," Stannis said, "but today they are the ones out of fashion." He permitted himself the smallest of smiles. "I intend to make it last." They stepped out into the corridor where the air felt as brisk as work begun early. Servants moved with the hum of a hive that does not know the hand is nearby because the hand is not swatting, it is guiding. Sansa passed with Marjorie and her ladies and looked like a girl enjoying a morning without dread. Arya loped with a basket from the kitchens, and Davos took it from her and carried it because she looked like she would pretend it was light. She thanked him as if it were an insult and a kindness both. He laughed. At the gate, Barristan took the reins of a horse that remembered him and bent the knee not to the king but to the saddle. Robert came with his antlers on his head and a grin he had earned. The court watched him ride out as it had watched him return, with the measure of men who have learned to weigh days. He went with a small party exactly as pledged. The morning took him. The city went back to its sums and its gossip and its meals. In the tower above the yard, Stannis stood with Davos and looked at the dot that was the king riding into the green. "We have turned the wheel a little," Stannis said. "Aye," Davos said. "Let's hope it does not roll over someone we want to keep." "It will," Stannis said. "It always does. The work is in pulling them from beneath it and setting the wheel back where it belongs." Davos scratched at his pouch and felt the smoothness of bone beneath cloth. "You were not made to be liked," he said. "I was made to be right," Stannis said. Davos's mouth slanted. "Not always the same thing." "I know," Stannis said. "That is why I keep you." They stood a while longer. The wind came from the sea and from the river in turns, salty and then damp. The city breathed. The realm did not bleed. Somewhere far off, a khalasar moved like dust. Somewhere nearer, a mountain frowned. Somewhere under their feet, a man with short patience and long memory counted his coins and decided to wait. For a time, that was enough. The work was not finished. Could not be. It is never finished in a realm where men and their hungers make laws into fences they lean on and sometimes kick. But for now the brothers had made a wall out of their old bruises and new vows, and the wolves and lions and roses and fish and all the rest could not help but note that it stood. And above it all the sky lowered itself with winter's hand, and men lit lamps earlier, and love and grudges were kept warm by the same hearth. When Robert returned, he would return to Sums and to bread and to a city that still said his name with more relief than hatred. When trouble returned, as it always does, it would find a house that had remembered, at last, that 3 hearts beat stronger than one. And between that day and the next, the sound of those hearts made a rhythm even rumors could not drown. The king rode with old care and new patience, and the forest answered him without malice. The horn calls were spare and clean, and mist lifted off the leaf litter in long rags so that the morning seemed to be shrugging off a cloak. Barristan took the left, a rangy Crownlands ranger took the right, and 2 of Bywater's men followed. Square-shouldered fellows who would rather lose a day's sleep than lose the king in Bracken. They did not pour wine at every halt. They poured water that had seen the inside of a clean skin, and Robert, surprised to find his mouth pleased by it, drank deep each time and felt no shame. They found sign before noon. Rootings like a plowed acre, the soil turned as if a giant's fingers had pried for treasure. The ranger knelt and pinched a clod between finger and thumb, smearing its damp into the lines of his palm. 2 stags' worth, he said out of an old habit of jest. Big boar. Hill round about the low alder and then go to mud if the sun holds. It will, Barristan said, watching the light filtrate pale and weak. Enough to bring him to the wallow. Robert felt the dogs pulling at their leashes like a memory tugging at a mind. He had always loved the blunt truth of hounds. They did not flatter, they did not plan, they did not judge. They wanted the thing before them and made a language of breath and bark to ask for it. He loosed them with a jerk of his hand and a quiet, "Go on then." They streamed away like smoke going backward into a lamp. The boar took 3 hours to find and 10 heartbeats to show his contempt. He burst from sedge with the speed of a man's anger, tusks wet, eyes clever as any thief's. The nearest hound went end over end with a sound that was not a dog's sound. Robert's horse shied and came back under him as if remembering a pact, and the king stood in the stirrups and threw the spear the way a man throws a certainty. It went in behind the shoulder. Not far enough. The boar screamed. There is no other word. It is a human sound in a bigger mouth. It turned, fast as a scored thought, and came for him, and Barristan's second spear struck its flank and did not stop it. And then the ranger's spear broke, and that sound, wood breaking, was the ugliest of the morning. Robert did not flinch. That was the one virtue he had never lost. He slid off the horse as if dismounting to greet a friend, snatched the shorter boar spear from the ranger's hand without asking, and set his feet in the loam. The boar came, a weight of fat and fury and fate. Robert stepped once, let the tusk pass, drove the point home under the jaw, and lifted with a curse that was prayer-shaped. The shaft jarred in his hands, the point tore, a wet ruin of sound. The boar's head banged his thigh as it dropped, and pain shot up bone like a thrown nail. He gasped, not at the pain and not at the blood that rolled hot over his boot, but at the knowledge in it. I am here. The boar heaved twice, as if trying to remember what it had been meant to do with the day, and then it stilled. The silence afterward had skinny legs and a proud chest, like a boy's first walk into a hall. Barristan's hand was on Robert's arm in the next breath. Your Grace. He did not make the word a plea. He made it a bandage. It is nothing, Robert said through teeth and breath and grin. The stink's worse. He looked down at the long gash that had opened the leather and the skin beneath, clean as a tailor's work. Well, I've been cut by better. The ranger tied off the wound with a strip of linen that had once been white. The blood ran until it didn't. The dog that had gone end over end rose and limped with his tail still tyrannically upright. The men took the boar with ropes and prayers. They went back to the city slower than they had come out, because there is always a slow way home when you are carrying what you came to find. At the gate, the small folk saw the carcass and the splints and decided, wisely, that the king had won. They cheered with that relieved, practical cheer a city gives a man who has returned it to itself for one more day. Robert raised a hand and felt, briefly, the ache of being worthy of a cheer. In the yard, a boy stared at the boar's tusks and dug his foot into the puddle until it became a river in his head. In an upper window, Sansa looked down and thought of songs that ended with feasts. Arya counted how the king had set his feet and how he had turned the weight aside. Stannis met Robert in a chamber already full of neatness and the smell of tallow. He took one look at the leg and said only, "Sit." A maester came and stitched with a cold deftness that made Robert sweat and swear and hold the chair arms as if he were a sailor and the chair a mast. When it was done, Stannis eyed the neat line and the king with equal severity. "You will not ride for 3 days." "I will limp," Robert said. "You will not limp to council," Stannis answered. "You will take your meat and your onion and you will be still. You will let the city learn you are mortal by rumor, not by sight." Robert barked laughter and then winced because laughter shakes more than pride. "You hand me onions like a penance." "They keep castles," Stannis said. "They kept ours." Robert ate the onion. It was sharp and honest and made his eyes water in a way that excused other wetness. He slept a clean sleep that night and woke once only to the sensation that something had reached a hand into his life and adjusted a plate so that it would not rattle when the table shook. He woke into work. It had waited with propriety, and then it came in all the same. A raven bore a black ribbon from the wall. Old Bear Mormont wrote with his square, soldier's hand, that the snows were teasing and the wildlings had grown bolder and more hungry, and that there were tales of dead men who forgot to lie down when night came. A tale he did not credit but which had, he admitted, stretched farther than he liked among men roughened by cold and fear. He asked for boots. He asked for salt beef. He did not ask for boys because he knew boys were an asking that earned speeches and not answers. Stannis had the letter in hand at once. "We will send what we can spare and some we cannot," he said. "We will write to White Harbor. We will write to Old Town for lamp oil and to Gulltown for tallow. We will send men to seize what oaken staves lie in warehouses with no names attached. Varys, we will have an account of every convoy that mysteriously mislays a chest of nails between here and Maidenpool." Varys inclined his head. "The mysteries will be revealed. They always are under a sufficiently bright light. We will not call for new levies," Ned said, looking at the chalky sky through the casement. "Not yet. The North will send what it can without names being shouted from tower to tower. Manderley will fatten ships and men both if asked in the right way." "Write him," Stannis said, and Ned had already begun writing. A different letter, folded with more care and a little dread, sat under a paperweight on Stannis's desk like a frog under a stone. It was from across the narrow sea, written by a hand that did not need to sign for Varys to say, later that day, "Our merchant friend in Pentos reports Viserys has bartered pride for impatience and the girl has quickened with child. There is talk of a stallion promising to mount the world. There is also talk of a man who sold secrets to save his skin and now wears his conscience as a shirt he can take off when it itches." Robert took the letter, squinted at the cipher that Stannis unfolded into plainness, and let old anger stride up his back with its boots on. "Targaryens," he said, and the word was the old curse, the old prayer, both. "How often must we stamp on that snake and find it in another garden?" Ned's jaw shifted. He had rehearsed an answer long ago, before he knew it would matter again. "We do not kill babes to prevent men from becoming their fathers," he said. "We do not let them beget armies," Robert answered, weary and still dangerous. Stannis held up a palm. "We will not decide this with slogans. What do we have? A frightened informer in a bad place. A Khaleesi pregnant by a Khal who cannot cross the sea even if he learns to love the taste of salt. A brother too foolish to plan and too proud to let another plan for him." He looked to Varys, who merely folded his soft hands and waited for guilt to pass by like weather. "We will not send assassins," Stannis said finally, clean as a cut. "We will send eyes, and if those eyes tell us of ships being built and gold being counted in ways that truly point to Westeros, we will prepare. Until then, we will not spend the realm's honor on a rumor's throat." Robert bristled and then let it pass through him, like wine wanting a cup and finding instead a skull with a crack. "Very well," he said. "I will not have the ghost of a girl on my bed for an enemy I can beat with boards and rope." He looked at Ned, whose face eased without smiling. "You may keep your sermons, Ned. The hand has made a law of them." "I will keep my sermons," Ned said, deadpan. "You will keep your temper. The hand will keep his numbers. Between us we may yet keep our skins." When the council broke, Varys drifted away like a dandelion tuft and alighted in a cool wine cellar where a courier he had not seen in a year waited with a seal he had seen too often. He read, breathed, and sent the man out with a loaf tucked under his arm and the knowledge that he could come again without fear. He had the good sense to tell only one truth today. He chose the one about the girl's pregnancy. Stannis dealt with closer fires. He sent Ser Beric Dondarrion out with writ and warrant to find Ser Gregor Clegane and bring him in chains if his crimes proved true. He sent Thuras of Myr with him, not because he loved the man's blazing sword, he did not, but because Thuras could drink men into telling the truth or at least admitting they had sold it. He gave them 20 good riders, 2 heralds, and 3 notaries, because a notary is more frightening than a knight to certain breeds of liar. Ned put Blackfish Tully's name on a quiet list of men to be consulted in the Riverlands. Brynden had the rare gift of honesty without cruelty and cunning without vanity, and the crown could use some of that in Green Country. Tywin received the writ by then, in a folded packet carried by a royal messenger who had the look of a man being watched by his horse for signs of sense. He read it once, pursed his mouth, and sent for Adam Marbrand. "Ser Gregor has been overeager," Tywin said mildly when the man came. "He will be recalled until the hand that feeds him learns to fear teeth within its own cuff. Send him word to return to Clegane's keep." Send him the word twice if once does not suffice." Marbrand nodded and left. Tywin sat with quill and ink and the knowledge that some pieces only keep their edge by cutting, and some must be put away sharp to be used later. He did not grieve for the men Ser Gregor had cut to be sharp. He did not waste grief that way. At the Red Keep, Arya danced. Syrio Farrell had drifted into their days like light through shutters, precise and unarguable. A Bravusi who called himself First Sword of the Sea Lord with a vanity so transparent it turned to charm. A man whose bald head and quick feet and relentless, patient cruelty to bad habits made a new language for Arya's limbs. "The girl is too stiff," he would say. "A girl is a stick. No, a girl is the water flying where it chooses." He would knock her wooden sword aside with 2 fingers. He would tower without height. He would insist that she see, not look. "There, little cat. The boy is not a boy. He is a man with a knife who has never loved anyone and will not weep when he kills you." Again. Ned watched sometimes from a doorway with a look that tried to be stern and was merely careful. Sansa, peeping around him once, made a face that folded disdain into curiosity and fled before Sirio's "I could catch her and make her join." Arya learned to step around chairs without touching them, to hear men breathing behind doors, to count to 5 before anger and to 10 before pride. Renly learned a different dance. Marjorie moved through the court with that gift some women have of making men feel taller without ever bending her own head. She spoke to Sansa and did not mock her. She spoke to Arya and did not attempt to tame her. She spoke to Robert and let him tell a story poorly and laughed exactly as much as the truth would allow. She asked Stannis for a list of charities that had fallen into neglect and then revived 3 without ceremony. She asked Ned which northern words she should avoid and learned not to use the word steward to a Stark unless she wished to be mistaken for talking of the back of the hall. She walked the gardens with Renly and held his arm and asked him what he wanted the realm to call him in 50 years. "Alive?" Renly said, and then, seeing her face, grinned. "Generous. I like the sound. I want to be useful in a way that makes men forget the joke they were going to tell." "Then be useful," Marjorie said. "And keep a joke in your pocket for when a room has to be turned like bread." They wed in measured splendor because the city had grown to like the taste of measured things. Loras strutted like a peacock and then, remembering himself, folded his tail and bowed. Olenna watched from her seat like a general approving a siege that would take exactly as long as it ought. Mace cried twice and called it dust. Stannis endured his nephew's kisses without flinching and allowed wine at table after the 3rd course. Robert toasted with beer and meant it. Ned danced once with Marjorie and once with Arya, who scowled and did not step on his boots. Sansa looked at the bride and thought, fleetingly, that not all stories lied. Some simply shortened the wind between lines. Jaime trained by day and watched by night. There was a way men moved around Stannis now as if they had learned not to waste his time. There was a way men moved around Renly as if they wanted him to waste theirs. There was a way men moved around Robert that had not been there before, less flinch, more look. Jaime did not dislike it. He declined to admit to himself that he might like it. Davos went to the docks and spoke to captains about rot. "Not on your hulls," he said with a grin. "On your ledgers. Rot's worse and spreads faster." They laughed and then stopped when he held out a paper with neat sums. He showed them where money vanished between ship and quay. He asked them to sign when it did not. "I was a smuggler," he told a man with hands like rope. "I know all the tricks. Don't insult me by using them badly." The man signed and spat and offered to pay him in saltfish when the crown failed him. "The crown pays," Davos said. "The hand holds the purse like it bites." "Good," the captain said. "Else I will." Winter cast its shadow a little farther each evening. The charity houses Marjorie had revived took in children with cheeks chapped raw. Bywater had braziers set at 3 dangerous corners after dark and did not announce it. Word did that work itself. Varys's birds brought rumor of a sell-sail company in Pentos being hired to guard a special cargo. He told Stannis and Stannis told him to count the ships and their drafts and whether they smelled of horse. "Not all cargo breathes," Stannis said. "The kind we fear always does." Catelyn Stark wrote from Winterfell a letter that smelled faintly of smoke and snow. She spoke of Bran and silence without naming the fall. She spoke of boys becoming men and men remembering boys. She wrote that the Heart Tree had heard her promise to keep their house while the South finished its work. Ned read it twice standing up and then sat down and read it again. He wrote back that the South had not finished and perhaps never would, but that this time, he thought, they had set something straight enough to make a winter bearable. He did not press wax with a flourish. He pressed it with a plain ring that said only what it needed to say. Beric Dondarrion sent word from the Riverlands that Ser Gregor had gone to ground behind his walls and would not be dragged out by parchment alone. He has no love of banners when they do not ride with him, Thuras wrote at the bottom in a bolder hand. But we found men who had loved their wives. We found fields that had been burned for practice. We found a boy who laughed when he saw my sword on fire and then began to cry when it went out. We will go round the keep and make a ring of writs if we must. And when we have enough, perhaps we will make a noose of them. Or perhaps the lion will do our work. The lion considered. Tywin sent a message to Dondarrion that said the mountain would be reprimanded and held to account by his liege. He sent another to Clegane that said nothing at all. The rider carried only a token that Gregor would know and understand as a warning sharp enough to cut any finger that disregarded it. He sent a third letter to King's Landing that made a show of compliance without bending a knee. Stannis read it halfway through and handed it to Ned, who read it whole and then folded it into a habit that would become law. Noble men were to be responsible for the crimes of their men when those crimes were ordered, known, or permitted. "It will take a generation to make this true," Stannis said. "Let us begin now." Renly, who had discovered the pleasure of being married to a mind that did not need instruction, brought Marjorie to the charitable kitchens and then let her go alone because the women worked better when a lord did not proudly stand in the doorway. He went to the yards and watched Bywater put the men through their paces. He put coin unobtrusively to a brewer who gave a measure more to the watch. He bent a knee to Barristan for an hour of merciless correction until the old knight smiled very slightly and said, "You are too showy," in a tone that meant, "Do not be." He made a list of names of young lords who were not fools and might be taught to like the taste of work, and he asked Stannis to give each of them a task too small to boast about and too large to ignore. Stannis looked at the list and added 3 names Renly had not chosen because he did not care for the fathers. "The sons will need to be better," Stannis said. "Make them better." "They will hate me," Renly said, cheerful and not unknowing. "They will dislike me," Stannis said, as if declaring the sky's color. "Let us share the work." Robert went to the yard with a healer's bandage still under his hose and hammered at a post until splinters flew and sweat ran into his beard. He called for wine once and then for water twice. The hound watched and said nothing. When he left, Sandor Clegane said to no one in particular, "He remembers." And that was praise in that mouth. Word from Bravos arrived at the Iron Bank's counting house that the Iron Throne had paid again, on time and without flattering notes about circumstances. A clerk put a red mark beside a line and did not smile. The bank does not often smile. It remembers. One night, quiet as dust, Varys met a man with rings like a minor prince's and a mouth like a baker's in an unremarkable chamber with a high, barred window. "The girl quickens," Illyrio Mopatis said through a smile that had never known hunger. "The call grows proud. Pride is softer meat than fear. He may be persuaded to think of shores. He may be persuaded to think of gifts. Gifts are heavy to carry," Varys breathed, "particularly when they breathe. He will refuse the sea. He will say it is poison. He is not wrong. Yet men drink it daily and live," Illyrio said. "You have made your king live." "That was a difficult thing to do. I am impressed." "I am not a conjurer," Varys said. "The king decided to live. I merely let life find him, which is always cheaper." "Cheaper," Illyrio said with a faint sneer, "is not a word I favor. It is one I serve," Varys said, and bowed so that the fat man could think himself taller, which would cost nothing and profit something. After, when he was alone, Varys stood very still and let the map of the realm arrange itself on the back of his eyelids. He placed 3 pebbles where winter pressed hardest, 1 shell where fire might one day be, and a coin at King's Landing with a stag on it that had, for once, not been bit clean through. Joffrey Lannister learned to scowl properly at Casterly Rock. It was the first thing he learned that year. The second was that his grandaunt Jenna could call his name in such a way that the sound itself seemed to judge him. The third was that his grandfather's silence was worse than any form of speech. He thrust at a Quinton and was told it was dead already. He gave a coin to a serving man and was told it had already been paid for. He kicked a cat and was pinched until he cried. Cersei watched and did not intervene. She stored the pinches to give back later with interest. Myrcella learned the names of the women who ran the halls and the boys who fetched water. She learned which door led to the old kitchens and which door led to the treasury and which door led to a place where salt air sang up through the stone and made a girl feel she was the sea herself. She wrote letters to Sansa and received replies that were all flowers, and then, slowly, one line at the bottom of one that said, "I am learning that the right sort of woman can be a sort of knight." Myrcella smiled and folded the letter into herself. Tommen learned that kittens at the rock were every bit as lovely as his mother had promised, and that his grandfather's hand, heavy as it was, could be gentle when it wished to be. He learned to sit still in a small chair beside a large chair and look as if he understood sums. He learned to like soup with barley in it and to ask the names of men who could not look a child in the eye. He learned that sometimes he could look at a man and make him look away. He did not know why this felt as if it mattered. In King's Landing, Littlefinger tried to be bored and failed. The new habit of counting made for fewer mistakes. Fewer mistakes made for fewer opportunities. He did not resent the efficiency. He resented the idea that men might learn to do without his kind of help. He drafted 3 clever loans that could not be objected to by any man who wished to appear honest, and he added 2 that could be objected to by any man who wished to appear clever. Stannis approved the first 3, scratched out the second 2, and sent back a list of questions that were not quite insults. Peter smiled. He would have to find his fun in the Vale, perhaps. Lisa had always been so grateful for someone willing to take a burden of decision from her and wrap it in a sweet. He wrote a letter that tasted of honey and helplessness and sent it with a writer who understood that arriving winded can make a message seem more urgent than it is. He did not need to lie. He simply needed to choose which truths to untangle and which to not. Beric Dondarrion made his camp beneath a stand of bare oak and spoke to men who wanted to be angry without doing any of the work anger demands. He handed them copies of the writ. He walked them through the words as if they were a path through bramble. He told them he did not want their fire yet. He wanted their patience, which is the hotter thing to keep. Thuras made stew and then made a little show of firelighting for the children and then said, in a voice that had heard confession in more places than Sep's, "You will have justice, if not vengeance, and if neither, then you will have a hand on your shoulder at the right time. Sometimes that is justice." The men grumbled and went to sleep and woke to find the camp still there, which is how trust begins. Bywater presented a man in chains at the morning court who had been taking copper from buckets to plate his tongue with silver when he spoke. He presented a boy whom the man had hit to make him quiet. He spoke softly in a way that made it hard to lie loudly. "This is how it will go," he said to the room at large, and the room learned that rules could be taught without being shouted. Robert watched with a pleasure so mild it surprised him. Stannis watched with a satisfaction so deep it barely rippled the surface. A letter came from Doran Martell, written in a hand careful enough to be mistaken for cowardice. It thanked the crown for clarity. It asked after the health of the king. It inquired whether the road south to the Boneway would be improved in spring, given that his merchants had suffered depredations from men who did not wear lions or stags, and whether House Martell could expect the same attention to law in the south that they now heard rumored in the capital. Stannis wrote back with a map and a promise of road crews paid for with coin that had previously vanished into song. He added a line asking whether Sunspear would be inclined to send a wise young head to sit the council for a season, to teach him where he had not yet learned, and Doran read it 3 times and smiled without warmth and then, unexpectedly, with a little. When the snows came, not heavy, not yet, but enough to soften noise, Robert found himself standing in a window with his leg aching the honest ache of a wound that is healing and said, "We will name an heir." Stannis did not blink. "The law names one." The law will be read by men with tongues. Robert turned, heavy and not slow. I will speak it myself. In the hall. I will say it without wine on my breath. Then we will not discuss it in corners for the next 10 years with daggers under napkins. Renly stood by the hearth and fed it a thin stick that made the flame taller than it had any right to be. You mean to say it to the city, not merely write it. I mean to say it to my sons, Robert said, and winced because the word was a habit the day had not yet cured. To the boys, to the realm, to myself. He looked to Ned. You will stand beside me. You will keep your face still when I want a joke. He looked to Stannis. You will take the weight and pretend it sits lightly. It does not, Stannis said. Pretend, Robert told him, which was for once advice Stannis took without argument. They did it before the court and after the morning petitions, as if it were work rather than spectacle, which was its virtue. Robert stood before the throne and did not mount it and said, The law is not a net to catch one man when we please. It is a bridge we all walk so the river does not carry us off one at a time. The succession is clear. I have no true-born sons. The line passes to my brother Stannis Baratheon. He spoke cleanly, every word filed to a shape that cut rumor off at the ankles. For the peace of the realm, he added, because he wanted the words to keep working when his voice stopped. Some men breathed out as if they had been holding their breath since harvest. Some men frowned as if they had a pain they had not noticed until a finger pressed it. Renly did not bow, he smiled, which was more dangerous. Stannis inclined his head like a man acknowledging a tool he was already holding. Ned did not move. Jaime, in the corner, stood a fraction straighter because of the clarity. Varys's lashes lowered because clarity is a kind of danger. Littlefinger's smile shifted a degree to the left because every certainty is a new board laid across a chasm and he had been planning to sell rope. Later, alone with his brothers and Ned, Robert poured wine and did not drink it. He set it on the table between them and looked at it as if it were an enemy he could not quite name. I will wed again, he said, unexpected even to himself. I will not pretend I do it for love. I will do it because a king without sons makes boys ambitious and men careful in the worst ways. He half smiled. What would you say if I told you I would take a wife out of Dorne? Ned coughed, and it was nearly a laugh. I would say the North likes oranges but does not like the men who carry them. I would say Doran Martell moves carefully, and that is a virtue this court has learned to admire, and that a match there would make the southern road smooth and the western men watch their tongues. I would say it would be a marriage that asked a king to remember the name of patience. Stannis said without irony, Find a woman who will not lie to you, or, if you cannot, find one who lies badly enough that you have a fair chance. Renly leaned back, lazy and attentive. Dorne has princesses who will not be told where to sit. They also have a way of making men think they wanted to sit there anyway. If you must, choose a woman who has learned to keep her counsel without mistaking silence for virtue. Robert stared at the wine. I will write to Sunspear, he said finally, and to Old Town, and perhaps to Riverrun, because Hoster Tully has always wanted to see a banner walk his daughter's hall. He glanced at Ned with mischief born of weariness and love both. I will not write to Winterfell, because Catelyn Stark would beat me for the thought and then serve me stew and forgive me with poor grace. Ned's mouth softened. She would, he said. And I would deserve the stew, Robert said. After the room had lost them and kept their echoes, Stannis sat with Davos and let the candle burn unthriftily. If he weds in Dorne, Stannis said, the West will call it folly and the Reach will call it a jest until they are told the jest goes on their bill. We will pay for peace with indifference and smugness for a year. Can you bear it? I have borne worse, Davos said, in smaller rooms with worse smells. Stannis rubbed at the bridge of his nose with a thumb and forefinger that would never be graceful. You will go to White Harbor, he said abruptly. Take the measure of Lord Manderley and his vaults. Take the measure of his kitchens. He feeds ships well. I want him feeding the wall better. Do not be charmed by his fat. It is a weapon. Davos laughed. I have learned to mistrust softness. It hides steel better than hardness does. He went. He went north, into air that had the taste of iron, and spoke to Wyman Manderley in a great hall where laughter could live and the sum of the household still be accounted for without embarrassment. He found a man who liked to be liked and liked to be thought generous and was, in truth, both. He found a son with sharper edges and a clerk with sharper sums. He arranged the movement of casks in winter and the keeping of faith in spring and the promise of ships in summer, and when he left a promise of onion soup for the watch that would embarrass men into admitting they had been treated well. Beric laid papers like planks across the riverlands and began to build a bridge over outrage. Gregor came as far as his own gate and stood there like a boulder that grins and would not come further. Tywin's letter, carried by Adam Marbrand himself, arrived on the second day of Beric's siege by parchment, and men watched the mountain's face as he read and saw it do nothing. "He will come," Thuras said in Beric's ear, "not as hope but as calculation, or he will run. Either way, he does not get to sharpen himself on farmers anymore." "Either way," Beric said, "we will be here." The words felt strange and then right. He had never thought of himself as a man who stayed. Yet here he was, and the staying itself made work, as staying always does. Letters stacked up like firewood in King's Landing. Some burned and gave heat. Some would not light no matter how you coaxed them. Some smoked and made eyes sting and minds water. Stannis's hand lived in ink. Ned's lived on lists and in steps that took him from yard to yard where promises show themselves to be lies. Renly's lived on shoulders and in doorways and in rolled parchments sent south with green thread. Roberts, on good days, lived on a hammer and on a child's head when he remembered to bless without making a joke and ruining it. The day snow fell in earnest and stayed, the city learned to love soup and lamps, and the Crown's men went street by street, quiet and unavoidable, keeping the peace as if it were a fire they were tending rather than a thing they had poured out and lost control of. In the Red Keep, the brothers ate together and spoke of walls and wolves and a girl beyond the sea with a fire not yet visible over the water. They did not say each other's names often. Brothers seldom do when the work is good. They did not need to. The shape of them in a room said enough. What came after would come with sharp teeth and slow poison and the old hunger of men with more pride than food, as it always does when winter and summer change places and the realm thinks it can choose which it prefers. For now the antlers stood. They cast a shadow in which other banners had to fold a little to pass. In far castles, men hunched over their tables and moved carved things in patterns that would, if they were lucky, survive contact with other men's patterns. In a tent beyond the sea, a girl turned in her sleep and dreamt of a house with wide steps and red windows and a throne that cut the man who sat upon it. In the black along the wall, a raven shook snow from its wings and flew. The king woke before the dawn and did not fear the night behind him. He went to a window that would not open and smelled winter through stone and thought, idiotically and beautifully, of Lemon and of the way his mother had smacked his knuckles for stealing sugared peels and then given him two when his father was not looking. He laughed once. He dressed without asking to be dressed. He walked out into a corridor where his brother's footsteps had already marked the rushes. The world was not saved. It was not even safe. But it was, for the moment, being held. And for a realm that remembered the feel of its own bones mended in the dark, that was a feast enough to set the table for, and to keep warm and to eat slowly. Snow came late to King's Landing and then all at once, a flurry of white that surprised the brick and the steep roofs and made the Blackwater shine as if it had been honed. The first morning men woke to it. The city made a noise it did not know it knew. Less like alarm, more like a question asked under a breath. The river steam turned to ghosts along the quays. The cats looked offended and carried on. Eddard Stark walked the ramparts and watched the snow decide which corners to own. And the air smelled briefly like Winterfell when the wind shifted and the last dead leaves rasped. He drew in that smell and let it out slowly. The breath took a piece of him with it and took a piece of the city back in exchange, and perhaps that was how a man survived being both north and south at once. By the river gate a horn sounded, thin and hard. Not alarm, announcement. Ned turned and saw the banner before he saw the men. It was black as a deep well with a small white world upon it. The Night's Watch had sent more than a letter this time. Alistair Thorne rode at the head of 6. His black cloak hung with ice beads like false jewels. He had pride wrapped about him and weariness sewing the edges. Behind him 2 brothers bore between them a small chest crusted in rime. They were careful because they were afraid of what they held and more afraid of dropping it and being laughed at. Ned met them in the yard. The watch bowed to the hand as to a winter that must be born. Alistair's mouth made a grimace that could be mistaken for a smile by a stranger. "You bring winter," Ned said. It was not a joke. The cold around the chest felt like meaning. "We bring proof," Alistair said. His voice carried the gratitude of a man who had not been believed for years and might be now. They took him to the council chamber. Robert was there already, a fur-lined cloak thrown over his shoulders and impatience under it. Stannis sat with quill and a list. Varys drifted with the draft. Pycelle arrived sweating despite the cold and dabbed at his brow with a cloth that had known better days. Renly came in with snow in his hair and left it there because it made him look like a winter song. Davos stood back, a counselor by habit and a sailor by stance, measuring the wind in men's faces. The chest was set on the table. Ice fog leapt from the seams like a thing escaping. Alistair worked the clasps with fingers that were not numb, only accustomed to cold's rudeness. Inside, buried in packed snow and salts and something that stung even a Southron nose, there lay a hand that had once been a hand and now was a lesson. The skin, what remained, had gone the color of a bruise that had forgotten the body. The nails were thick and black and longer than they should have been, hooked. The fingers had frozen in a clutch that begged and threatened in the same shape. When Alistair lifted it with a twist of cloth, frost smoke twined from the wrist's end as if breath could yet be found there and refused to be. Pycelle made a noise that was meant to be disdain and came out wary. Varys's lashes lowered, a curtain to let thought pass. Renly did not make a jest. Stannis leaned in until the breath from his nose lay as a gentle white cloud upon the wristbone. Robert's mouth, so often a place for laughter and wine, flattened into a line as ugly and useful as a good wound scar. "Tell it," Stannis said. He did not look at Alistair because he did not need to. He looked at the hand as at a book. Alistair told it. He told of a small party in a dead wood, of a man found instead of lost, of eyes that opened when they should not and a mouth that bit at a throat that had been a friend's. He told of fire. He told of dragging what they could save through miles of old snow to find a cold enough fastness to keep it from becoming only a story. He spoke like a man who was not wasting words lest he be asked for more. When he had done, silence sat like a seventh council at the table. "The wall asks," Alistair said finally, and the ask was made proud by the shape he gave it. "Not for songs, for boots, for oats, for oil, for men who can be taught not to drop a torch if their fingers go numb." "You'll have them," Robert said roughly, before Stannis could make a plan of it. "You had them before you asked if the hand had his way. Now you have them and my word to boot." "You do not have my word to boot," Renly murmured, and Alistair's mouth twitched in spite of himself. The joke did its work and then lay quietly down. Stannis was already writing. "We have cargoes waiting in White Harbor to come down when the river thaws," he said. "We will send some up from here by road. Harder, slower. Still, we will do it. Gulltown has fat we can render to lamp oil. Old Town has hands enough to buy cloth in bulk for wraps." "Ned, I have men who know the land north of the neck," Ned said. "They will walk supplies ahead of carts when wheels are fools. We will have storehouses at the wayside by spring. If spring fails, we will have them by stubbornness." Alistair's eyes flicked to Pycelle and away. "Maester Aemon asked me to tell you that he is old and his bones do not warm as they did. He asked me to tell you that he has not lost his mind and will not do so before next winter." Pycelle dabbed at his lip. "Maester Aemon is a worthy man. The Citadel has always. Send him enough parchment to write letters without counting sheets like prayers," Stannis said. "Send him a younger maester with strong legs and humility. Find me one. I shall consider." Pycelle began, and Stannis said, "You shall do," so calmly that the words took the shape of a winter road and the old man found himself walking it. Robert reached for the hand and stopped himself one finger before touch. He did not like that he had stopped. He looked at Alliser. "You've brought me a thing I can respect," he said. "I can beat a boar. I can beat a man. This," he nodded at the hand, "this I can beat with wood and wool and coin. That is a fight I will win." Alliser bowed. He would have preferred a sword. He would take wool if it came with truth. Later, when the Watch brothers had been fed until they sweated and lodged with blankets that did not smell of other men's deaths, Varys drifted to Stannis with that curious courtesy he wore like perfume. "There are only so many casks of lamp oil between here and the wall," he murmured. "We will need more." "Then buy more," Stannis said. "From whom?" Varys lifted two fingers, delicate, almost comical. "The merman will sell at a price only a Lannister would blush to pay. The Tyroshi will bargain until we are in spring or in war. The Bravosi will sell you truth and oil both, if you make a contract shaped like honor." "We will make it," Stannis said. "We will not owe the Iron Bank more than a realm can bear." "You surprise me," Varys breathed. "I intend to surprise men until they get used to truth," Stannis said, and Varys bowed to the blade of that sentence and went to find a man with a ledger that would bleed less than a border war. In the same cold brightness, a Dornish party rode under the red sun speared by a golden blade, and the city took them with the curiosity it saves for people who smell like oranges and secrets. Their horses were fine, their men quiet, and at their head rode a man who folded arrogance so neatly it looked like grace. Oberyn Martell had eyes that laughed and a mouth that did not unless he wanted it to. He dismounted in the Red Keep yard as if stepping from a dais and inclined his head to the king with a courtesy that would be remembered if it was not repaid. "Prince," Robert said, a word he used seldom and disdainfully, and now with a care that startled him. "Dorne sends me a spear in winter. Do I take it as challenge or gift?" "Both," Oberyn said lightly. "A challenge to be better at peace, a gift to make it so." He turned his head a little and the light liked the angle. "My brother's gout keeps him, and his temperament keeps him cautious. He sends me to be both frank and entertaining. I am not known for failing at either." Stannis' eyes narrowed, not with dislike. "Habit. You will sit our council." "I will visit it," Oberyn said. "I prefer rooms where men's words can find air around them. I have been told yours can." Ned studied him as he would study a new knife. Appreciate the balance, know where it cuts. Robert opened his hand as if to catch a jest and let it go. "You come when the tables are clean," he said. "We cut off a rot that would have ruined a marriage and fed the city a story instead of blood. I tell you this so you do not do me the discourtesy of hinting I require a conscience put on loan." "I would never loan a conscience," Oberyn said. "I prefer men who buy their own." He smiled then, and it was almost kind. "I have come with 3 matters. One is a bride my brother wishes you to consider. One is justice my sister's shade demands. One is a chair my brother asks you to hold open for a Martell, so that the realm might believe you care what the southmost wind says. Take them in the order that causes me least headache," Robert said. Oberyn shone his teeth. "Then the chair. I will sit it until my brother tires of being comfortable. I am made to be a nuisance. Better here than in a brothel breaking bottles over a sellsword's head for his poor singing." "Agreed," Stannis said at once, to cut short a dozen scurrilities that would waste a morning. "Next, justice," Oberyn said softly, and the word changed temperature in the room. "Elia of House Martell. Oberyn of House No Patience. You sent riders after Ser Gregor with parchment and good men. That is a start. My brother wants an end. He wants a head." The smile had gone away. "I will accept the head severed by law. I will not accept the head as a story told behind a door. I will not accept a head presented with a lion's apology and a stag's sigh. I will accept a head that rolls because a court pushed it with a foot that is not covered in Lannister red." Ned's mouth loosened, just enough to show the relief a man feels when a weight he has carried alone is lifted by another who has the arms for it. Stannis' fingers tapped once on the table. "You will have a trial," Stannis said. "In the city, not in a keep where men with their own banners decide law. Witnesses are being found. Writs are being written. If Ser Gregor comes when called, he will be tried as a knight and a lord may be. If he does not, he will be tried in absentia and his goods forfeit. He will be outlaw. I do not use the word lightly, outlaw. Then any man may strike him and be thanked. Oberyn bowed his head a fraction. Then we understand one another. I will stand beside any man who lays the writ before him. He will read the writ. The way he said read promised that someone's lips would bleed learning the letters. And the bride? Robert asked. He made his voice deliberately lighter and failed a little. My brother proposes Arianne, Oberyn said, and the name sat like a fruit heavy with juice. Princess of Dorne, cleverer than he would like and less obedient than he be. Red ends. She can wear a crown without asking it to make her head smaller. She will come with a bride price that feels like a treaty rather than a sale. She will come with memory in her baggage. We do not forget Elia in Dorne. Neither will she. Robert set both hands on the table, not to steady himself. He had not had wine, but to keep from reaching for the goblet he wanted. I do not ask you to forget, he said, honest as a bruise. I ask you to help me make the future heavy enough that the past stops moving. That is a good sentence, Oberyn said, and meant it. It may even be true. My brother will wish assurances, that her children will not be made into fodder for some lion's pride, that her house will not be mocked for swearing to a man who forgets to keep his promises when a horn sounds for hunting. Then your brother will have them, Stannis said crisply. We can write them. Better, we can live them. The queen who left the city left with honor. Her father left with pride enough to spend and some coin besides. We do not intend to buy peace with lies. Oberyn tilted his head. You will write to Sunspear and begin to bargain. Dorne enjoys bargaining the way your reach enjoys bread. Do not be put off if you are offered dates and ask for oranges. He turned to Renly then with a curiosity that was not cruel. You have taken a Tyrell flower to wife. Does she prick? She pricks those who need it, Renly said cheerfully. I have not needed it often. You will, Oberyn said. When you do, keep your laughter and use it. It will cut. They sighed over terms for 3 afternoons, not long as Dorne measures time. Doran's letters came back with the slowness of a man who knows that slowness makes other men reveal themselves. He asked for a dowry that was not shameful. He asked for a tour of the Bone Way to be funded by the crown, because roads are a sort of promise men make with their feet. He asked for Ser Gregor's trial to be announced and begun before Arianne crossed the Mander. He asked for 1 Dornish judge to sit with 3 of the crown's choosing. Stannis crossed out judge and wrote assessor, which made the lawyers stop smiling and begin to work. Robert agreed to most of it with only 2 jokes, both of which died when no one laughed. While words worked their slow mills, other wheels turned. Alliser Thorne left the city with 3 carts and a letter with the king's seal and the hands lists. And with him went 1 man out of 10 from the city watch who had no wife and did not flinch from cold on a morning. They left to cheers that surprised them and embarrassed them and sent them into a tavern for a last drink they did not need and would remember when their fingers hurt. In the Street of Steel, Tobo Mott took on 3 more apprentices at reduced price because the crown sent noble commissions with plain hilt and honest weight and did not sneer when the bill came. Gendry hammered a rivet and thought of the king's hand heavy on his head, and did not smile because smiling blows make poor rivets. In the small hall, a man stood as if to petition and instead pulled from his sleeve a knife that had last tasted fruit, and Bywater's man drove him into the floor so quickly the man put his face into his own blade out of confusion and cut his lip. He stammered that he had been paid to look foolish so others could laugh and begin another quarrel while the king was shamed. Stannis had no patience for theater that was not his. He had the man branded behind the ear where only a careful wife would see it and ordered him drummed out of the city. The rumor that followed, "King's men are quick, knives are slow here," did more work than 100 hangings. Littlefinger went to the Vale. He went with a smile and a promise to bring Lisa Arryn comfort in the form of names of men who had wronged her and could be made to pay. He told her softness was a virtue only when it was used like silk rope. He told her that the realm was stable now in a way that made men suicidal if they wished to make coin from chaos, and that this meant he would need to find his profits in corners for a time. He told her she could be a corner and make it a window. She cried. He held her and did not smile until she could not see it. When he left, he had a letter naming him the Vale's modest fiscal advisor and a promise that no knights would ride east without being weighed first by a soft hand. He did not intend to let the soft hand weigh anything. He intended only to know where the weight was. Oberyn sat a council session and yawned his way through tariffs with elaborate politeness until Stannis asked him if he kept ledgers, and Oberyn replied, "I keep score," and then proceeded to destroy 3 smuggling rings with 2 questions that made a merchant drop a lie onto the floor and step on it. After Stannis said, "You may be of use," Oberyn said, "Of course," with enough mildness to make it insulting and somehow not be. Tyrion returned from the Trident with the smell of wet horse and old laughter and found the city changed. He liked it less and admired it more. He sought out Varys and traded 3 rumors for 1 truth. He sought out Davos and drank onion broth as a jest and then asked him about currents near Hardhome with the seriousness of a mapmaker. He sent a letter to his sister at the Rock that did not reach her because Cersei intercepted her own mail now and burned what made her feel less powerful in the moment it was read. The trial of Ser Gregor was announced for the first day that would be convenient to men who took justice seriously and not convenient to men who sold it. The city, which had expected a spectacle sooner, reacted by growing quiet in a way that troubled men used to shouting. Witnesses were being found with more gold than fear. A septon wrote down 5 names and then recanted 2. A girl brought a torn scrap of a tunic and a memory she could not tell without vomiting. A boy who had no mother left and no field took bread in exchange for showing the old healed slice on his thigh where the mountain's man had struck carelessly to teach him about walking quickly under a horse's belly. Oberyn listened to them all and did not speak in rage. He saved rage, like a miser saves coin pressed with his own face. Renly and Marjorie made their house. They gave dinners to men who had grown afraid of dinners because the last ones had ended in slander or in debt, and theirs ended in songs and in promises written out so a man could see his name among other names and feel more virtuous for it. Olenna sat like a hen who had a dozen chicks and was generous enough to lend one. Loras beat 3 men in the yard in a way that did nobody shame because he did it as if he were showing them a new way to stand. Barristan watched him and said nothing until the 3rd day, then said, "Your left droops," and Loras corrected it and bowed. Sansa learned to make a curtsy into a weapon and a smile into a door. Marjorie taught her with the patience of a girl who had been born under a roof that had conversations in fruit bowls. "Do not lie," Marjorie said in the garden one afternoon when the snow had receded enough that Rosemary pretended it had lived through worse. "Tell them the best truth you have. It lasts longer. It makes you seem like a bell when they pull on a rope." "I do not want to be pulled," Sansa said, and surprised herself at saying it. "Then hang yourself higher," Marjorie said, "where the rope is harder to reach." Arya learned to listen for the sound of soft shoes on stone and for the absence of sound that means a cat who has seen you. Syrio made her balance a bowl on her head while reading aloud from a list of city gates and the names men had called them before they forgot their own grandfathers. "Words are weights," he said. "If you do not pick them up and put them down properly, you trip." Again. Ned walked in on her once and stood in the door with a face that was trying to decide whether to scold or to be proud. He settled for, "Do not let the bowl break." And when she did not, he gave her a look that said, "You did not get that from me and I am not entirely unhappy about it." The day Oberyn and Jaime fenced, the yard filled quietly as rain fills a basin. They did it with blunted steel and sharpened attention. Oberyn moved with the cheerful malice of a dancer who knows he is better. Jaime moved with the insolent economy of a man who feels his body to be a weapon before any blade. Barristan called the strokes and made no allowances. 3 times the points flashed, 3 times the crowd breathed in, 3 times the steel clashed with a sound like the city remembering to live. At the end Oberyn grinned and called Jaime by a name that had no lion in it. Jaime saluted and did not make a jest about snakes. They bowed as if the bow were part of a private language in which the only word was wariness. After, Oberyn drank watered wine and said to Stannis, Your city is less boring than I had feared. It is also less corrupt than I had hoped. Hope for better stables, Stannis said. You may use mine when mine are empty. You make courtesy like a punishment, Oberyn said, amused. It is work, Stannis replied. People here have learned to do it. The raven from Sunspear came at dusk with the smell of warm stone on its wings. Doran's hand wrote that Princess Arianne would come when the season allowed it. Not sooner, not later. He wrote that the Martells would accept the terms as revised by the hand with 3 small changes that were not small. A guarantee of Dornish inheritance customs in her children's household if she should die before them. A standing place for a Dornish captain in the King's Harbor Guard. A promise, written and witnessed, that no one would call Elia by names that would require steel to answer. Stannis wrote back with the precision of a smith making rivets. Robert added one line in his own hand. We will drink lemon with the wedding feast. Doran, reading, allowed himself one smile that an old servant saw and took as a good omen and then told no one, because that was also a habit in Sunspear. They set the court at candle's height for the first day of Ser Gregor's trial. The mountain did not come. He sent a man who sent a letter that had been dipped in wine to make the ink run in places a clever hand could call accident. Stannis read the letter and held it in a pair of tongs as a smith holds unhardened metal. Absent, he said, and the word was a stone dropped in a bucket. Proceed. Witnesses spoke. Lords came and did not. A miller's wife who had miraculously found her tongue spoke and would not stop until Thuras of Myr said, Child. Because she was older than he by a decade and grief makes children of anyone. A man whose brother had died tried to make bravado out of tears and failed and was better for failing. Oberyn asked few questions. When he did, he asked them gently. It was worse than cruelty and better than anger. Tywin did not attend. He sent Kevin, who sat with his mouth like a purse drawn tight and did the work of hearing the words without letting them into his blood. Outlaw, Stannis said on the 4th day, and the Hall, which had learned to treat the word as a tool rather than an entertainment, took it and did not break it. His lands forfeit, his name blackened in the crown's rolls. Any man who brings his head to the city will be paid. How much? Someone dared to call, and Robert said, Enough to buy a better horse and a better conscience. And the Hall laughed because it could. The word had been said and the law had been made to stand upright and the anger had been given a place to sit. After, in a room that smelled of wax and a little of relief, Robert sat with his brothers and with Oberyn and with Ned and said, We have walked several days without tripping over our own feet. I am beginning to be suspicious. You should be, Stannis said. We will stumble. The question is whether we fall. We will not, Renly said promptly. Marjorie's hand on his sleeve said, Say less. He smiled and did not say more. Oberyn looked into his cup. We have made bargains that will keep, he said. We have held men to laws who did not like to be held. We have made enemies who will learn to call themselves friends again when it suits them. We have made a queen in Dorne and a trial in the city and a warm corner for the cold at the edge of the world. It is not a bad month's work. It is not a month's work, Stannis said. It is a life's work. Then you chose the right life, Oberyn murmured. Or it chose you. Outside, snow went to rain and back again, uncertain of its own season. The ships on the river rocked against their piers with the soft impatience of beasts kept in harness. Bywater's watch stamped their feet and held their spears low. In the Red Keep, the day ended as days end, with men putting their names to paper, with bread being eaten in rooms too small for songs, with a girl balancing a bowl on her head and walking 3 measured steps without letting one word spill. Near midnight, Varys glided into a long gallery where moonlight made patterns on the floor like a sea at peace. He stood a while and listened because that was his faith. He heard the murmur of servants bedding down, the laugh of a guardsman who had somehow found a joke without wine, the scrape of a rat where perhaps there had been bread. He heard, far off, the low long sound of a horn blow he could not have heard, carried down on winter air that had not the kindness to be logical. He shivered and did not know why, which he did not like. He set a small pebble on a windowsill where no one would see it and then picked it up and put it in his pocket. He liked to know where things were when the wind rose. The wind would always rise. On the morrow, Robert would put his seal to another letter to Sunspear. Stannis would send Davos east to speak to Braavosi, who wore their truth like hair, long and often brushed. Renly would plan a feast that did not bankrupt a man who laughed at it. Ned would write a line to Winterfell that said, "The city has learned to be quiet when it should." Arya would keep the bowl upright. Sansa would hang herself a little higher. Oberyn would take a walk along the walls and find the places where the stone had forgotten it was meant to be strong and touch them and smile the smile of a man who notices everything and is not always kind. The realm went on with its work, and the men holding it did not tell themselves stories about how brave they were. They were busy. It does not look like heroism when it is being done. It looks like lists and a refusal to be bored and a willingness to tell a man to stand straighter because there is pride in it. It looks like coin counted and not stolen. It looks like soup ladled with a hand that remembers the taste of hunger. It looks like letters written without flourishes and signed with names that will be cursed and blessed in equal measure when songs are made without enough salt. Winter came closer. The Khalasar turned. Across the wall a white thing took one step and then another and then forgot it had been a man. In the capital, lanterns were trimmed and wicks cut, and the snow fell and then it didn't and then it did. In a high room, a king slept without fear of the night stalking him, because tomorrow he had a boar to eat and a trial to hear and a letter to sign and a woman to write to about oranges, and there was more life in that list than in any of the old dreams. It would not last unchanged. It never does. But it lasted now, and that now had weight. Like a hand on a shoulder in a hall where the fire kept speaking, and the world, if it listened, could almost imagine learning to speak back.